of the Grand Forks Public School Board, and as a reminder, the flags have moved over here. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we have the approval of the agenda. Were there any additions or subtractions?
No changes, Madam.
Okay, thank you. We had on our agenda appointment of student board member if Ryan was here, but he's not, so we'll move to the approval of minutes. We'll take these one by one. I'll call for a motion of the July 10th, 2023 minutes. Motion by Dr. Lund. Is there a second?
Second.
Second? Josh? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Item B, July 24th minutes. I'll take a motion for approval. Motion by Bill. Is there a second? Second by Monty. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. And the last one, July 31st. I'll call for a motion. Dr. Lund, is there a second? Second by Bill. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. I forgot the reading of the school board norms, so since I forgot, I will read them. School board meeting norms: be prepared, be on time, value and respect each other, exercise thoughtful deliberation and conversation, be professional at the board table and when visiting with the general public, speak up when the norms are not being followed, and advocate on behalf of students and keep the community in mind. Next on our agenda is public comments. We don't have any blue cards. Is there anyone wishing to speak in the audience? Okay. Superintendent's recommendations for discussions, recruitment and hiring update, which fits in with strategic plan area 3. Griffin?
Thank you so much for giving me time today to present to you on our current recruitment and hiring update. I have a couple slides here that I will share with you. The first one is just some data on our current openings as well as our hires, and the second one is kind of our sourcing strategy that we've been utilizing. So, and then I'll make sure to answer any questions that you guys have. There we go. Got it. Okay, so as far as our current openings, we have 7 certified teacher openings. So those are more the classroom teachers. 2 special education openings. So we've been able to fill a majority of those. For speech language pathologists, we have 4, and psych we have 6. Currently with those 2 positions, we are filling those with virtual psychs and virtual SLPs. So those positions are technically filled, but we would rather hire people into those positions as it costs us much more to use the virtual option for SLP and psych. Our custodians, 10, cooks, 9, special education paras, we're at about 150 openings, which is, we have about 37% of our special ed paras still left to fill. So there's about 350 special ed para openings in our positions in the district, and about 150 left open. So I checked with the special education department. This is pretty on par to where we were last year. The big difference this year is the applicant pool. They have several more applicants than they did last year. They've had a couple hiring events where they've filled all of their slots for their hiring events. They hired 14 more on Friday. They have another hiring event coming up, and they have almost all their slots filled, so they're anticipating another 20 to 22 interviews and hires. So the applicant pool is much better than it was last year. Part of that is probably due to the increase in our wages, as well as some of the advertisement that we've been doing, which I'll get to a little bit later. For Encore, they have 23 openings, and speaking with the Encore director, she had a lot of people returning that she was not expecting, and that was due to the wage increase. And then just other paras, 8, and then a couple just regular different classified positions open. So those are our openings right now, so we feel like we're in a pretty good position going into the school year, especially with the continued pool of applicants for our special ed paras. As far as how many people we've hired, we're at about 95 certified employees for the new school year. And classified, we're at about 45, although I just saw Les processing a ton of new employees, so that number is probably closer to 55, 60 already at this point. So we continue to get those applications and hires coming in. And then we have 22 international teachers as of right now that we expect to start with us this school year. That's on top of the 15 that we hired last year. So as far as the timeline of the 22 international teachers that we have coming on board, we do anticipate that a handful of them will be able to arrive before school starts, with the rest of them arriving early in September. So we're sitting in a much better place than we were with international teachers as last year. A lot of them didn't get here until November, December, and even January, some of them. So any questions on the openings or new hires before I kind of dive into what we've been doing as far as marketing our positions? Monty?
Thank you. So how exciting that we have this many new hires, right, in the state. Do you have any feel for what it looks like across the state, Griffin? Like in terms of schools our size, does it seem like, a Bismarck, a Minot, a Fargo, do they have similar kinds of openings? And I know it's maybe not apples to apples, but just wondering what your finger is on the pulse of new teachers across the state of North Dakota.
I don't have a good pulse on that, but I know from conversations that I've heard that it sounds like some of the other schools in the state are struggling a little bit more than we are. And I know Dr. Brenner said people reach out to see where we're at, and it seems like we seem to be in a little bit better position than some of the schools in our area. So I think our new contract and the investments that we made into all of our positions as far as compensation is helping with that too. So.
If you don't mind, this follow-up as well. Are the international teaching candidates coming in on H-1B visas as well?
Yep, they are all H-1B, and a majority of them are special ed. I think there's 2 or 3 that are classroom teachers. So.
Question about the international. So you said there were 15 last year. Did all 15 stay this year? I know that was a requirement of the visa, right? They have to stay a certain number of years. Is it 3?
It depends on, so typically it's 3, yes. Some of them, depending on their visa situation, it's 1, and then they have to get it renewed. So of the 15, I know that 1 had some issues with their visa that we were not able to retain. So the rest of them we did.
I apologize for being late. The special ed paras, I'm sure there's concern for that area.
Yep, so we're about on par with how many openings we had last year, but we do have a really good pool of candidates that are coming in compared to last year. They didn't hardly had any applicants, so they're pretty thrilled with that. The people that they've been interviewing have been very qualified, really good candidates. They've offered, the last round, they offered positions to everyone they interviewed, and they said it's been a while since they've done that. So they have really good quality candidates coming through right now.
Last question, just remind me what SLP stands for.
Speech language pathologist.
Thanks.
And that next slide just kind of talks about what we've been doing from a sourcing strategy standpoint. When I first joined the district, our strategy for recruitment was just basically we'd posted our positions on our recruitment website and hoped that people applied. There was a little bit of advertising here and there, but nothing done really strategically. So back in January, we did implement a contract with Jobs HQ, which is Forum Communications out of Fargo. With that, we have lots of different postings and things like that out there that I'll get to, but with all of what has been generated, there's been 526,000 impressions for our advertisements that have been put out there from January through the end of July, so 7 months. And 50,438 of our videos have been fully completed, and that's the video that was created, I think, last year. That is running on on our homepage, so 50,000 times that's been completed. This also pushes out to Jobs HQ, to their job board, as well as dozens of other job boards that they have connections with. So we're just getting our reach further out there throughout the nation. It also allows us to do some geofencing, which is cool. Currently, that our geofence is really around the region, but we are able to manipulate that and be more strategic in the future. Say there's a specific career fair in Fargo or in Minnesota that we want to geofence, we can reach out to Jobs HQ and say, hey, let's shift it over there to this career fair during that, and then people at that career fair in that geofence will get fed our ads. So we're going to look to use that a little bit more strategically. Right now, we've just kind of been pushing out generic advertisement with that. CTV or OTT, so that would be like Netflix, Apple TV, Roku. We have our ads feeding through those services as well. And YouTube, we decided to utilize that as we have a lot of our videos and things like that go out through YouTube, so it's utilized quite a bit through the school district, so we have our ads running through YouTube as well. In the last 7 months, we've seen an increase of applications for the same time last year, during that time, of 36% for total applications. For certified positions, there was an increase of 72%, and this doesn't include international teachers. If I included that, it'd be around 400%. So I did weed those out. Classified is about 45% increase in total number of applications. So we're definitely seeing that our brand and our positions are out there more because we're seeing more applications come through. So with that, our future of sourcing initiatives, right now we're really focused on just getting our name out there, getting our brand out there, getting out there that we're hiring. Previously, the only way you'd be able to find us is if you were actually to go to our website and look for positions that are open. Now we're getting fed through different websites, through Netflix, through YouTube. So we're really just trying to get our generic branding out there, and then in the future try and target more strategically the positions that we need to fill. Some of the things we're looking to do is off-the-wall advertising, which is if you've ever been into a restaurant or bar and they have the advertisements on the wall in there, it's a really good source that we're going to look to utilize throughout the Grand Forks area for our paras, cooks, and custodians. River Cinema, if you've been to a movie, they have the ads that are playing beforehand. Those are actually really cheap to do, so we're going to look at doing that and utilizing that as a source. And then just doing more with social media, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn. And then the final part of that is really to work more on our employer branding. We started to create a careers page. It's out there now, but really looking to utilize that more and create testimonials, why Grand Forks Public Schools is a great place to work, have more photos out there of our employees, and then really updating our recruitment video because that is going to get stale here, so we should create a new video and create more marketing advertisements with our own people in them, because right now we're just using stock photos with Jobs HQ, so they really want us to use some of our own employees in those photos in the future. So, any other questions?
Sorry, Griffin, I had a lot of Diet Coke today. So I have a question for you regarding SLPs, because I know UND has a speech language program. Do we have any, and I apologize, I don't know the answer to this, but do we have any kind of cooperative agreement with UND to try to place more SLPs? I know that's a tough spot to fill, but I just envision for our kiddos who require that service, and I know we're doing the best we can, but having that through video format or online is probably really tough for those kids and maybe isn't providing the best service, but it's a service, I get it. Is there any kind of agreement with them, or do we work with them? Could you explain that?
I don't know if Catherine or Terry would know, but I know that it's not a large group as far as I remember from my time when I was at Ultra, we recruited SLPs too, and they're difficult to recruit. And healthcare tends to pay more, I think, for them too. So I don't know if we do any sort of if they do any clinical rotations through Grand Forks Public Schools at all.
They do like a student teaching practicum with us, but I would agree with what Griffin said. A higher percentage of them are going into the medical clinical setting than school setting.
We're hoping some changes we made to the teacher negotiated agreement too in the future will attract more SLPs. But I think a lot of our student teachers had already taken other jobs before we were done negotiating the agreement. So.
Yeah, and what she's referring to is now we'll be able to bring them in at a higher pay because they have more credits for that program, which should help going forward. And we're starting to advertise those positions at that correct pay now too, so.
What about support for the international students, teachers? I know we're not quite on recruitment, but I just thought of that because you mentioned that they're not in that number.
The, as far as like onboarding and all that kind of stuff? Is that
Well,
what
I mean, there was a lot done for them last year in terms of furniture and apartment setup, and I don't know how sustainable that is for the district.
Yep. So we have a group out of Fargo. Their name's Dan Claire Johnson. They're the ones that helped us get the connection in the Philippines, and they are going to do more of that this year. They helped a little bit last year, but they're really taking on that transition phase of those international candidates. So they're helping them get through the processes into the Philippines, as well as educating them on what they need to do when they get here as far as setting up a bank account, get a cell phone, go get your social security card. So they're doing all that education before they get here. And then they are going to pick them up from the airport. They're already working with Campus Place to secure housing for them, apartment complexes for them, so we can get them all in one location. And the goal is that we'll have keys to those apartments before they get here, and we can start delivering any donation items directly to their apartment instead of storing them at the school and then having them come pick up there. So they did agree that we went above and beyond from what else they've seen in other school districts last year, and felt that we could still do some of that, but maybe focus on more of the standard key necessary items as far as the donation items.
So they're like a consultant that the district has hired.
Yes, they're out of Fargo, and they help all school districts around the region get connected with international candidates, and part of their services is they'll help with the onboarding process too. Thank you.
Mr. Elwine, you're up next. Summer projects update.
Good evening. As you know, it's a very exciting time for Grand Forks Public Schools as far as projects go. I'm just going to give you an overview, kind of high level of what's going on this summer, some updates and some photos, and at the end I'll leave some time for some questions. We'll start off with Central High School. We had some carpet replacement done in the main office. It looks very nice. I have some pictures here. It replaced older carpet that we had and some subfloor that had asbestos in it. We abated all of that, and we installed this nice new carpet. Moving on to Cushman Field, this is again a very exciting project. We replaced the field turf. We resurfaced and repainted the track, and that is all complete and ready for the football games this fall. As you can see, this is a project we can all as a community be very proud of, and thank you to All True for their sponsorship. Ben Franklin, we've got a replacement of HVAC. We installed some sprinkler systems, installed LED lighting. We replaced carpet in the east wing. This project is in process. Construction is to finish in learning spaces on the 18th. An update to that, the HVAC will be complete except for the chiller, which was delayed due to supply chain issues. We don't expect delivery of that until December now. So we will likely be putting that on next spring. We got some pictures of the HVAC and the lighting projects going in. And then I have a couple here of near-finished classrooms. These look very nice. I'm very pleased with the work that our contractors have done. Viking Elementary, again, we replaced HVAC, installed sprinklers, and LED lighting. This project's also in process. Construction is to finish in learning spaces again August 18th. This one should be ready to have air conditioning up and running by the time students get here. They will be working as the teachers move in, but we expect them to be have the cool air in there before the students start. And again, we have some pictures of our radiant fin heating and some of our HVAC and lighting upgrades. Lake Agassiz, we're coming off of UND's steam, coming off of their steam plant and moving to a hot water boiler system, which is a very good thing for the district. The infrastructure was just not great, and it was expensive to buy steam from UND. So this is a project that is going to very quickly pay for itself. Again, this project is in progress. They'll be out of learning spaces 18th. They'll continue to do work, but all work they can do after that, they can access from the outside of the building. Got some pictures of them replacing some pumps and installing some new piping and insulation. We have a district-wide lighting upgrade. This is part of our energy savings project, converting to LED lighting throughout the district. This project is in process. It's approximately 80% completed. They're continuing to work on it. They will continue to work during the school year, but it is minor work that they can do on evenings and weekends. It will not disrupt learning. They just have to change ballasts and bulbs, so it's not a big deal. I did forget to add one in here. We have the Schrader roof project. As you know, the Schrader roof collapsed and over the fax lab, and we had a replacement of HVAC in there and a replacement of the full roof. That is nearing completion. We expect again to be out of there by August 18th. Everything should be finished except for the casework, which again was delayed due to supply chain issues, but we see probably putting that in December. Do we have any questions?
Mr. Elway, now that you've gotten your feet a little wet, not very wet, but a little wet, it's always nice to have fresh eyes on things. Are there any areas or things that you've seen that we maybe haven't focused on that you think we maybe should focus a little more on throughout the district at all?
District-wide, I think you guys have a very excellent plan. I will thank and give credit to Chris Arnold, who held this before me, but a lot of these projects were of his making, and I essentially just jumped on the train as they were rolling by. So I want to give thanks to him. He had a very good insight on that, on replacing things as we could even say menial as carpet. But that's a very important part of our learning experience. But focusing on the HVAC, focusing on the lights, these are projects that'll pay for themselves, and these are projects that'll greatly enhance the quality of learning in our schools.
Yeah, on the Ben Franklin project, you say the chiller is not here. Does that mean the school will not have air conditioning? In the past, part of the school had air conditioning from, older units.
We will be able to cycle air through there, but we will not have air conditioning in the new wing. So the air handlers are up there, but the chiller we will not have the chiller available until December. So we'll be able to circulate air throughout the building, but we won't have chilled air on that side.
On the whole school or just on one side?
We'll be able to circulate air through the whole school, but we won't have chilled on the new side.
Okay.
Since we're on Ben Franklin, you said that you replaced the carpet on the east wing?
Yes.
Does the carpeting on the west wing need to be replaced as well, and we just didn't get to it, or what's the status of that?
That wasn't part of our original plan for this phase. It does need to be replaced, and we may have some piecemeal things to do throughout the year, but that will probably be in whatever next phase we look at for Ben Franklin, will be to replace that carpet.
And then I have some anecdotal comments that have been given to me by a couple people, not even teachers at the district wondering about the status of some of the walls at Ben Franklin, like things peeling away and some mold along the classrooms. But I don't know what side that is. Are you aware of anything?
We had a comment about some mold. It was surface mold. We inspected it. It was just due to the vinyl wallpaper they had up there, and we have remediated that. It's not a big deal at this point. There was no deep-seated mold, so we're at an impasse with that. We don't think it's a major problem at this point.
So so Wilder, did you have a slide on Wilder?
No, ma'am.
So pardon me if I'm supposed to remember this. What's the plan for the window air conditioning units for Wilder? What's the timing on that? I just have so many things in my head. I don't think it's an age thing. I don't think I have early onset Alzheimer's. I just think I don't have enough capacity to remember everything right now.
Yeah. Dr. Schaap, members of the board, we, as you well know, the broader plan here is to have the entirety of the school district air conditioned in 2 years, and we knew that Wilder was one of those spots that we had yet to identify. So once we did pass that guaranteed energy savings program, we knew that was a spot we needed to address, and we sought essentially 3 scopes of service on that. Is you can put in a full chiller system, you can install mini split systems, or you can basically do window units. And I think Finance Committee had recommended that we pursue those mini splits. And when we did do that, Jonathan and the team looked into ordering those, and that put us I can't recall exactly how far out, but they would not be in this year nor next year.
Yeah, I have a bit of an update. Our problem with that is twofold with the mini splits. First off, is getting the units was difficult within the time frame allotted. And then secondly, we are near or at our capacity on our switchgear for electricity, so our electrical infrastructure cannot handle it. If we would have to replace a switchgear, we're looking at, between 10 and 15 months lead time to get one. So right now we're pursuing a temporary option of putting, individual portable units in the classrooms. We're testing that right now, and if it works as we think it will, we'll put them in all classrooms. It's not an ideal solution, but because of the long lead time for the switchgear, it's kind of not feasible to do our original options.
So I thought we were looking at I'm looking at you for that.
Well, I think we talked about window units, but then we looked at this other option, which is a little more quieter. It's a little better fix if it works. No, the one they're testing, I'm not exactly sure what it looks like.
Yeah, and so the difference between those mini splits and then those window units is the unit that makes all the noise is going to be outside the building. So sometimes on the roof, sometimes on the ground adjacent to the building. Whereas those window units we're all imagining the ones that plug right in the window, or what these are is actually a floor unit with some ducting to the window, which can give you just a little bit more flexibility and are often quieter. So those mini splits are a better unit, but knowing that we had such lead time and bigger things to address on the electrical capacity, pursuing this to get that immediate relief in those classrooms.
Time frame for the floor units is what did you say?
It's now. We were testing one currently, and if it works, we're going to outfit all the classrooms with it.
Thank you.
Melissa, did you have something?
So I was wondering, how many schools do we have, other than Wilder, because I knew they had to do something different, how many schools do we have now still that will be without air conditioning for this school year?
Do you want me to start?
Go ahead.
Off the top of my head, Lewis and Clark.
Yep.
One of the wings at Schrader, a portion of Kelly.
Yep. And Kelly and Lewis and Clark are on the docket for next year.
So we're getting awfully close. The commitment is still over the course of 2 years, we'd get it done.
But for this year, Ben Franklin won't.
They won't because of the back
Because of the
order.
delay of the
Yeah.
shipping, so.
Yeah. So, and just to clarify, because Monty brings up a good point, Valley and Twining would have at this point, a whole new build for their air conditioning.
Any more questions for Mr. Elwin? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we will move on to the Finance Committee report under Superintendent Recommendations for Action. The first item on the agenda is the consideration of the Career Impact Academy Guaranteed Maximum Price. Brandon?
Yes, Chair member, or board member, Chair Flynn and board members, thank you for your time. Finance Committee had a very busy meeting and plenty of things to report on. And as Amber mentioned, starting with the Career Impact Academy Guaranteed Maximum Price. For this presentation, I just want to give a quick reminder of where we come, where we're going here. So it's been a long time, a long process in this Career Impact Academy. We did move forward earlier this year with the design of the building, and the point in which we're coming back to the board with an update on is now we've gone to bid, and we have, for the first time in this project, a price. We know what it'll cost, and so there's some decisions to be made. Tonight, I'm joined by a host of team members here. Sean Senescal with JLG is going to start us off with a update on that design concept. You heard from him not long ago, but unfortunately, we had some technological difficulties and couldn't show some of those updates, so we're going to walk through that first. Brett Cummings has been our lead with PCL Community. He cannot be here tonight, but Sean Scott has been instrumental in the bid process. He's with PCL Community and will also join in presentation on the guaranteed maximum pricing. Keith Lund, President and CEO of the EDC, is here and has been here longer than I've been in this chair in support of the project. And then, of course, our core team members are a part of the project: Eric Ripley, Director of CTE; Jonathan Elwine, you just heard from, Director of B&G, in addition to myself and Terry, Dr. Brenner, asking any questions here today. So the process would be to provide that presentation design update, and then go into the bid results, and then we're going to put it in context with a lot of the conversation that took place at the Finance Committee to bring it to a discussion point here today. Sean?
Good evening, everyone. As Brandon said, we were hoping to have this presentation earlier this summer, but ran into some technical difficulties, so excited to be able to give it to you all tonight. I know some on the board have heard a design update. Some of this will be maybe information you've already heard before, but hopefully you'll be able to see some new images and renderings of the building that'll get everyone excited for the project. Thank you. All right. I'm going to start out with, again, a site plan. I believe everyone knows the location for this project, but the old Holiday Inn is our site. The big yellow long rectangle is obviously our building. And then we'll look at a couple what we call expansions on this plan, or alternates when we get into the floor plan. But two things I want to kind of point out. One is circulation. So on the south side, you can see the parking lot. That is the main parking lot for the project for all the faculty and students that'll be driving. They'll use that south parking lot, enter through the south side will be the main entry, which we'll see in the floor plans. The other side, the north side, is reserved first and foremost for bus drop-off. So the existing roadway that goes through there that is going to be dubbed Career Drive is going to be the main bus loop, and then we have a bus pull-off. So students that'll be bused will come to the north-hand side. And then you'll also see in the floor plan a lot of our high bay spaces, program spaces like automotive and building trades, spaces that need access for deliveries or trailers, equipment, or things of that nature. We've intentionally placed on the north side of the project so that we can separate that student access, faculty access on the south side from equipment, deliveries, things of that nature on the north-hand side. So we're kind of separating the circulation for safety, security, things of that nature. So all of that comes from the north side. Here's a first floor plan of the project. A couple things that I want to point out. The main entry, and I'll just highlight. The main entry for the project, again, on the south side, we do have an entry off of the north for those the students that get dropped off by bus, but the primary entry would be on the south. The main floor plan, as you can see, is very linear, running east-west. That was intentional for a couple of reasons. Creating a very easy to navigate building, easy wayfinding, easy to navigate for new students, especially for our students that are going to be coming and visiting from outside communities, was really important. So very simple linear floor plan where you access all of your classrooms, lab spaces, learning spaces from a central hallway was really kind of the makeup of the overall first floor plan. The other thing I'll mention, on first floor, the program spaces, if you can't read them, the program spaces on first floor, aviation, robotics, engineering and architecture, automotive services, precision technologies, culinary, and then building trades. The other thing I'd like to point out is the security or the access during the times where students won't be entering the building. The way that we've set this up is going to look very familiar to the safety security plan that was presented as a part of the referendum. So a guest coming to the facility will only be able to gain access through this south entry. They'll enter into a vestibule. That vestibule is locked to the school. The only way to get in is to be allowed in access through the administrative area, which is directly next to the vestibule. And then their access into the rest of the school is only through that administrative area. On both first and second floor plan, we have staff collaboration rooms. So there will be no offices for instructors in this facility. They will use a shared staff collaboration area where that's their working room, their spot to have desking, printing, and resources like that. I'll flip back and forth again. So this is what we call our base bid. And then we have two alternates that we're going to be talking about a lot tonight. One of the alternates is welding, which is on the southwest side. There. And then the other alternate is the commons, just to the north. So just as kind of a background reminder, these two areas, think of the alternates as we separated those from the project so that we could get pricing very specific to building those two pieces, so that now today we could look at those collectively to understand if this is a priority to move forward with the project or not based on how much they cost. That's kind of what we mean when we say alternates. Second floor plan, really quickly. Program spaces, sort of on our west wing, if you will, is the medical careers, so human performance, CNA, EMT labs, and then also the other program on second floor is IT and programming. Both on first floor and second floor, we have what's called flex classrooms. Those are classrooms that are not owned by any particular program, but can be used and scheduled by anybody. And we have 4 total within the project. Really quickly, before I jump into maybe some fun exterior and interior images, any questions on the site plan, first or second floor plans?
Just 2 quick questions. I think some of us are hoping that this will be open for the public in the nighttime, and I didn't know are all the doors just locked and then the corridor stays open at night if they have a culinary class, or I assume you guys are working on this so that it's not going to be an 8 to 5 building, it's going to be a 8 to 9 p.m. building. And then the second quick question is, if the alternative passes, what happens to safety and security on the bus side? I guess I'm curious about that.
I'll answer that question first. Whether it's the base bid, this plan, or the alternate, we have a vestibule on the north side. During the bus drop-off times, that's going to be open to allow students to come in. When it's not a bus drop-off time during the scheduled class times, that's closed down and nobody can enter. The only entrance is through the south side. But during bus drop-off times, the discussion was those doors would be open, and then it would be there'd probably be an extra set of eyes on that area to monitor it. But if you were to come to this facility at, say 11 o'clock to pick up a student, the only door that you'd be able to enter through is the south side. Your other question, events after normal school hours. One of the other benefits of having a really simple floor plan is, so all of the spaces that stem off of this main corridor that runs east-west will be locked doors, so that after hours, no one can get access unless they can get access, if that makes sense. If there is an event, let's say in the common space, someone rents out that for the evening, the option to have security might be pursued by the school district, but the project itself intentionally is very open and visible to spaces to get students excited about program areas that they might not be enrolled in. And so we didn't want to necessarily close that off with barriers that weren't necessary, but we know that we'll have a safe and secure building after hours. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I'm not concerned about limiting things. I want to make sure that it's open. It's just that if we're going to have adult CPR training at 8 o'clock at night, we don't want them wandering through robotics and taking half the equipment
Correct.
away too. So,
Correct.
or culinary or those kinds of things. That
Yep.
was my main focus. So,
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. Other questions on any floor plans? Otherwise, we'll. So I have a handful of exterior renderings that we wanted to share. This would be, an aerial view from the southeast side looking towards the main entry for the building and the south side of the project. Again, we have a very linear building. Part of that was circulation. The other reason is natural light. The narrower the floor plan that you have, the more natural light can infiltrate into the middle of your space. And we're really proud that almost all of our spaces have access to natural light for students, which we know impacts learning. You can see up at the top of the roof, there's a projecting element that we call a clear story. That's windows that kind of separate, windows that kind of define that space to let natural light into the middle of the building. If I jump back to the floor plan, where you see kind of right in the center of the building will be flooded with natural light, and we'll look at an interior shot of that as well. Here's an image of the front door experience that a student or instructor will get as they're entering from that south parking lot. One of the things that we heard from students really early on is they don't want this to feel like a traditional high school in terms of brick and mortar and things of that nature. Let's let the exterior be emblematic of the type of learning that happens inside. So with that piece of information, and then as well as from a design lens, looking at how do we construct this as fast as possible, and how do we use materials that are cost effective but yet durable and will last a long time. And so you can see we have a really simple exterior palette. We don't have a ton of materials, but we're using predominantly metal panel and glass, and we're using color and texture to give it interest and intrigue so that it's exciting, it's inspiring for students. Just another view of that south side. This one kind of highlighting some outdoor opportunities that we have for learning environments. And then an image, this is of the north side. So this projecting mass would be the commons that we looked at in the floor plan, the commons alternate. Understanding that this is going to get a lot of access from buses, but also visibility from Highway 2. And so, again, using the same palette throughout the building, but then also looking at signage on this south side to create some opportunities for visibility from Highway 2. We're going to jump to the interior. So this would be on the second floor in what we call the Creative Hub, which is that central area that kind of disperses into the hallways and the different educational spaces, programs, and labs. You could see up above all the natural light that comes in. But the other thing that I wanted to point out, another thing that we heard from students is this idea of making the Career Impact Academy a learning lab. So for one example, you can see we have exposed structure in here. So students can start to see, how does a beam come together with a girder? And how does a truss lay on top of that? Keeping that open to kind of allow for that both natural learning, and perhaps it could get incorporated into the curriculum as well. That's one example of this idea of kind of a learning lab that we're hoping to have with this project and the design. And then again, in the spirit of not having this look like a traditional school, with the Career Impact Academy, there's a lot of fun materials that can be used that you maybe wouldn't put into a traditional high school. So using fun materials, but then bringing in wood for some warmth and color, again, to create an inspirational space. We're going to get into some example images of the learning spaces. So here's an example of the CNA lab. Again, in a learning lab scenario, how do we create a CNA lab as an example that can be very close to a real life environment that students will hopefully move on from and work in? How do we bridge that working environment with learning environment? So creating a space that will seem very familiar to students, but again, using color and textures to give it interest and intrigue. Here's an example of the engineering lab. Again, kind of talked about exposed structure, but also doing things that allow for acoustic treatments in the space so that it's comfortable for students in all aspects. But then little things like having cord rails come down from the ceiling rather than being forced into a certain location within the floor. Those little things we've been thinking about for maximum flexibility. And then image of the building trades lab, again, using color, texture to create a really inspirational space for students. Other thing I'll point out is, within some of these high base spaces like building trades or automotive, taking advantage of the height of these spaces and trying to have as many opportunities for storage as possible, understanding that some of these programs require a lot more storage of building materials, wood studs, and things of that nature. And then finally, this is an image of the commons alternate that we looked at. This would be kind of on the north side looking into the building. The commons we talked about as being a multi-purpose room. At one point of the day, it could be an opportunity for students to meet with one another or instructors, sit down together. But then the next day, a tractor could be brought in here and it could be a living learning lab. And so you need to have a space that feels comfortable in terms of scale and materials to students, but also durable enough to handle machinery and equipment in here. And so I think we've done a good job of balancing a really welcoming, fun spot for students to be, but also having a durable space that has all the infrastructure that could handle a tractor being in here, as an example. Those were all the images and information I wanted to share. I'm happy to answer any questions or jump back to any slide that I might have skipped over.
So is the idea that you would take one class here and then transport yourself to this building and then go back to your school? Yeah,
So it's going to be a block schedule, and maybe Eric can come up and describe it a little bit better, but you wouldn't spend all day here. It's a block schedule. You might have one or two blocks that you would engage in a day, but this wouldn't replace your normal school day. You'd still take your English classes at Central or Red River. You'd still take your history classes, but programs specific to CT you would be taking here, and you'd go kind of back and forth. And Eric, I don't know if you want to expand on that any.
I'll just jump in real quick. So Eric Ripley, a director of CT. So a great question, Maggie, into what Sean allocated. These are all CT courses, right? So students, whether you're coming from Central Red River or an out-of-town school, you're still gonna need your math, your sciences, your social studies. And so you would be on a block schedule, and you would come to Career Impact Academy for a 2-hour block course to take a CT class. Now, students would have the option. They could transport themselves, which is what we do with some of our courses that are shared between like Red River High School and Central, like autos. But we also foresee bus transportation. We don't want transportation to be the barrier for the reason why you can or cannot participate. And that would include our out-of-town students as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Eric, before you sit down, we did on some of the tours see examples of CTE centers who had sort of a dual, like an English or math class there too. So I imagine that there could be some options at some point in the flex classroom depending on how the flow works and things like that. But
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually, President Flynn, to your point, from those meetings, that was the original iteration of the Career Impact Academy was you wouldn't spend just part of a day, you'd spend maybe half a day and you get your CT course plus a science or a CT course plus math. And can you align that math course to be, we'll just say geometry for building trades so that it's very applicable to what they're learning in the technical skills. Where we just ran into a challenge was space. You'd have to build a building significantly bigger than what we're talking about to be able to accommodate science labs, math rooms, et cetera. However, I do agree with you. I think flex classrooms give the opportunity for that. And I know our rural schools are very interested in students coming for more of a half of a day experience versus a 2-hour course just to justify some of the windshield time. Catherine?
If I can add to this, and again, it's an iteration down the road, but there's been legislation that's allowed us to be more creative in how we assign and go after course credits so that there can be classes in which the standards for multiple class courses are realized within that one class. So again, as they're building the buildings and trades building, are there standards within English that we can check off, mathematics that we can check off? That takes obviously quite a bit of planning, foresight. We need to make sure we have people who are highly qualified, et cetera. But there are all kinds of opportunities now within some of the guidelines that DPI has given us freedom around that we can explore down the road. It'd be pretty exciting.
So Industry Z is currently a dream in some guy's mind out in California, but in 10 years it becomes a reality, and it's mainstream, and we want to teach that. Can we expand to this building somewhere?
Great question. It might be a little bit of foreshadowing to the topic after this one in terms of land space. But expansion has always been talked about, a phase 2 to capture all of the program space that we weren't able to capture in this initial phase 1 has definitely been talked about. What I will say is that there was also discussion so far in design about, how can we take a flex classroom, and if Industry Z comes along, how is it designed so that it's flexible, like I talked about with cord reels coming down from the ceiling as one example. How can a flex classroom be turned into program space specific to Industry Z? So
the short answer is yes.
The short answer is yes. Anything's possible with time and money. And space. Yeah. Happy to take any other.
I have one, Sean. So I was looking at, I don't know if this is the completed, signed floor plan of the building, but as I looked at the reception and career center area, I didn't see, Eric, do you need a school nurse there, or a career counselor, or a social worker? I didn't see office space for those people, and I thought, if you're building and you're not building that in, then you're squeezing them in later, and that didn't make sense to me. And then the second thing is, will the culinary lab or the commons, if people are there coming in from wherever they're coming in, do you ever serve lunch? How do we provide lunch or breakfast to kiddos in this building, and where does that happen?
I'll answer the second question first. The idea with culinary lab, the first idea is that lunch would not be served out of this because the idea, again, like we talked about, a student wouldn't be here from 8 to 3, what have you. The idea with the culinary lab and the cafe is that if there happens to be a project in the culinary lab, they're making pies that day, as an example. Those pies could potentially be offered to students in the cafe space, in addition to some coffee offerings. But short answer is lunch won't be provided. There's a lot of difficulty in doing a culinary lab in addition to a kitchen, because those spaces need to be separated. And again, part of it comes down to money and space and time. Does that answer your second question? Yep. So then, to answer your question about, a wellness room, career center, part of it is probably we just don't have every space indicated, but sorry, I'll point at this one. Within the kind of administrative area, which is here, we have kind of a reception space, and then right next to the reception space, that room right there was intended to be a flexible, what we're calling a wellness room, but that would be where if a school nurse is there during a portion of the time, that's where he or she would see students in this kind of wellness room. And then career center, we have a conference room, a spot, a touchdown space for the career center. Again, the career counselors, this won't be their permanent home, but certainly they'll spend time at the Career Impact Academy, meeting specifically with students. And so they have a conference room that is kind of earmarked as their space, but it could also be flexible in nature. Yeah.
Is there an elevator on this floor plan?
Yes. So kind of right in the center here is what we call that creative hub space. We looked at the second floor of it. There's a main kind of welcoming stair that is open and takes you up to second floor, and then right next to it is a elevator for the whole facility.
Sean, is the right next to the elevator, I'm looking at it to my left, there's what I think are bathrooms, and then there's a square within the bathrooms. Is that a single stall?
That would be a janitor room currently.
Okay, so
Yep.
do we have any single stall bathrooms in the facility?
We do have single stall facilities,
Okay.
and I will say that the toilet rooms are kind of an ongoing conversation about how we're handling those. So I would say maybe allow us to come back with an update on where we're at with the toilet rooms.
Okay.
Because there's broader conversations going on there.
Okay. I like the idea of the flexible space for nursing. When I was going on the tours of the CTE centers, I was nursing my son, and so I had to pump on the trips, and they had a space for employees to do that,
Yep.
but it was in the nursing room, and so if someone was in there, so I think it is good to also have some private spaces for staff. The staff collaboration is great, but especially for workplace accommodations as such like that. So I think it's neat to see how the spaces can be used in different ways, but operationally, how there's some privacy too.
Yeah, great point. I'll invite Sean Scott from PCL to come up. As he's making his way up, I'll kind of give maybe some context that'll be helpful as he talks. So if you remember, back in September, we completed what we call schematic design for the project. And schematic design is that first early design phase where, think of it, we're working with modeling clay. We're not working with, finer materials than that. At the end of schematic design, PCL helped us craft a budget for the project. But the way that they crafted that budget is they're using, regional construction pricing and metrics. They didn't put it out for bid at that point. But obviously they have worked a lot in the region and have the knowledge. So they're putting together those numbers to help us kind of establish a budget for the project. So this spring, when we started design back up, we moved into what we call the design development phase. That's when we start working we sharpen our pencils and we start putting in detail. And at the end of design development, we delivered a package to PCL at the end of May. And that package was advanced enough where they could put it out to the market, and that's what they did. And so earlier when Brandon was talking about, we actually have bids for the project. PCL took those drawings that we refined, they put it out to the market to get hard bids. And so what Sean is going to talk about is that GMP pricing that we got back. So.
And just one point of orientation, on electronic page 34 of your packet will be a summary of that GMP bid package.
Awesome. So that process of putting those drawings out to market, following Century Code, we're getting it in the Grand Forks Herald, we're getting it in the Fargo Builders Exchange, we're putting out our own solicitation out to the market. So outboard of getting it out in the press and in the builders exchanges for anybody to access, we also invited 400 plus contractors of our own in our system based on the local market and anybody within 150 miles traveling in to do the work as well. So we got the word out. We created a bid package. We analyzed the drawings. We put together defined scopes of work that allow us to avoid future surprises, gray areas between bidders in the making their own determination of what their scope's going to be. So we put out bid packages to try and really get the granular, the scopes of the work defined so that when we get those bids, we know that they're bidding what we wanted them to and that we avoid those discrepancies and gaps in the future. So we put together a scope of work. It had 39 different bid packages. And across those bid packages, we received over 80 bids. And so we had more than multiple bidders in every category. So we were very happy about that. And they were very competitive bids. So if you wanted to flip to the variance report page, this one has a blue column down the middle. That kind of gives us the roadmap from the SD budget to the GMP budget.
Page 50.
Thanks. So from the September 2022 SD budget, we discussed as a team and we presented at a previous board meeting that we suggested an escalation of 3.1 million be added to that. So you'll see that down at below the bottom near the contractor contingency. We have anticipated escalation. So that brought the project total at that time to a 26, just shy of 26.1 million. And with our GMP bid results, we came in over $1 million lower than that with our pricing. Again, there's ups and downs from an SD budget to a GMP budget. We're used to that. We see certain aggression in certain bid categories. We see it ebbs and flows with the market and what's hot and what's not. We also see the conservative, we see that our estimators be conservative in certain categories and more aggressive in others. So it makes, we weren't concerned with any of the ups and downs here. We also took some of them to look for opportunities for value engineering opportunities as we continue to work down the path as a team for this. So things like looking at different metal panel options, taking a look at some of the electrical and mechanical, seeing if there's more opportunity on certain efforts. So we've discussed that as a team. We were very happy with where the GMP came out. And then we also, as you would have seen in our front summary page, we explored those alternates of the commons and the welding space as well. So overall, it was a very good showing on the GMP. We were happy with where it landed. We got together early on between, we received the bids on July 18th. We analyzed those bids as quickly as possible. When within 3 days, we knew that, hey, we believe based on the bids we received, we're on the right track. And by that Friday the 21st, we were like, I'm comfortable saying this is going to be under a $25.7 million job. We had some spreads between lows and highs. We then spent the last 2 weeks after that working with all of the subcontractors, making sure that they met Davis-Bacon, making sure that they had the proper prevailing wages into the job, making sure they had the right scope, and that's where we landed at the GMP price that we're at right now. Are there any questions?
Maybe more of just a clarification outside of the finance committee. Can you talk about furniture being included or not in the GMP?
Okay, yes. So for the most part, the furniture that is loose, like the furniture you see within the rooms like here that are loose, are not included in the GMP. Anything that's fixed or hard on the wall, millwork, the curtains that you saw in the nursing space, that's included in the specialties package within the GMP and within the millwork scope.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I would just add, in addition to furniture in a CTE building, there's lots of equipment as well. That equipment is included in the GMP, but you'll see later on where we've created some budget numbers to start assuming those costs as well. So furniture, CTE equipment, not included in this GMP package.
And I believe part of the approach to that was that, Eric's going to be working hard on grants and additional opportunities for bringing that equipment into the space from the perspective of Grand Forks Public Schools. Us as a contractor can't go and talk to certain companies and get them to donate equipment on behalf of the programs. And the Grand Forks Public Schools has a unique opportunity to do that and really make the best bang for the buck on the equipment side of things for filling the building up with donations as we focus on getting the building built.
Thank you for all that explanation. I just have a question for you. So what happens in the event of, I looked at everything, it's so interesting, glazing is item number 18, and it was over $1 million before, now it's $818,000. So let's say there's a crazy spike in that. How does that reflect, and who pays the difference? If that does go back up to $1 million and it was bid at $818,000, and that's where Company X said they're going to take care of it, how does that difference, who pays that difference in that really expensive glaze then? Or how does that happen in the whole construction process?
So right now, the risk that we're on is kind of a clock, right? So moving quickly reduces that risk of escalation. Everyone has to hold their bids for certain periods of time. That's the industry standard. So, they bid on July 18th. Some bids say that they have 30 days before they will no longer honor it. Some bids say that they have 60 days. We're kind of in that window. 60 days is a pretty common, length of time that we'd expect the bidders to hold their bid, and that's what we put into our bid package was 60 days. So these numbers are good until the end of, into the middle of September for us to sign up those contractors and get them going. And they're priced accordingly with their suppliers in that same regard. If a project is to delay, then that's where that escalation is kind of, it's borne by the owner at that point, or yourselves. In terms of minor ups and downs from here on out, I can have a conversation about the contingency that we carry within projects. So at Sean and JLG's suggestion, with Brandon and whatnot, and the budgets we'll talk about further, there's an owner contingency of 5% on top of the overall project. Within my GMP, there's a contractor contingency of 2.5%. So the contractor contingency is used to fill those gaps, deal with any of those contracting issues that I have with regards to if I had to contract for $830,000 for certain things that glazer missed. That's what the contractor contingency is for. The owner contingency is for, hey, we want to switch from the bathrooms as they are to single stall bathrooms, and that would be an owner-driven change that would hopefully be a $0 change, but it would be something that we'd address out of the owner contingency.
How many flagpoles are there at $9,250?
That is one big high flagpole, yes. That's inclusive of the foundations, the getting it erected and put in place, and a 5,000 order and delivery. Yeah.
Okay. Brandon?
So just to clarify too, as far as the mechanism goes, this board had selected PCL Community as a CMAR on this project. And so what the big consideration point here, should the board accept any one of these scenarios as a GMP, is that's what PCL Community is offering this board. It's a guarantee not to go beyond that. So if we come to terms and contract that, outside of our delays, outside of our own contingencies or those kinds of decisions, if something happens, that's borne by our construction manager at risk. So I would like to draw your attention, just to kind of pull this in a little context of this decision point that the Finance Committee worked with, page 84 of your electronic packet, and then 85. So this is my attempt of pulling some of these numbers together against what funding we have secured, some sources that are still yet speculative, and then put a little more context around the impact, possible impact on the building fund. The Finance Committee had a lengthy conversation, and it may include further, more folks here sitting in the audience should there be questions. A lot of good conversation, but one thing that was asked of me was to come back with a few more numbers and put it in context of the building fund and just how all this comes together. So I'll just explain page 84 and 85 before we can go into a discussion. So just by way of navigation on page 84, I want to just point your attention to the top left-hand corner described as base bid. So you can see that there's two elements below that, construction and owner contingency. What corresponds with the documentation provided by PCL Community is construction under the GMP estimate. And then you'll see the owner contingencies beyond that. That's something that's advised for us for all the reasons just discussed. Should we make other decisions, it's good financial planning to keep a little contingency. The decision point tonight would be to weigh in on that construction cost line. The first of the colored columns is yellow, and that just represents that schematic design, that phase where they were still estimating those prices before the numbers came in. The red column shows how the numbers have come in. So you can appreciate the change, and again, if there's anything we're celebrating here is we've had a successful bid process. We were able to estimate along the way of where we thought these costs would be, and we've come in under, which is a fantastic place to be when we're considering moving forward on a project. Construction owner contingencies come together for $26.2 million. Beyond that is where you start to see some of these other costs, which will most certainly be incurred, but not included in the decision point in front of us. Professional fees, furniture, that's the furnishings, and then also CTE equipment as a lower line, so separate but both included. And then some security equipment, as well as some general testings, geotechnical work on the site, etc. That really brings your total project into the mid portion of this document, labeled total project cost subtotal. So for the base bid, what we've been referring to all night, that comes to $30.5 million. As you move to the right, and then I'll go down later, and you move into those other colors is where you bring in those alternates. There's no particular order, although I have commons ordered first, and then welding. There's no assumptions about any priority between those two. But you can see those are just added, so the construction of that alternate, the owner contingency of that alternate, any additional furniture required with that new square footage or technology, and then a subtotal, so 1.8. And then moving further into the gray where you have that next alternate, the welding lab, there's a little more equipment, so you get to nearing $3.2 million. That next section, something I've labeled as known gap, is meant to bring in context that funding and what's secured. So jumping down to where it is labeled funding secured, you can see the sources for this project, the state match, and the Team Grand Forks funding. That doesn't count the land value included there. But that was the initial concept, $10 million and $10 million, and brought those two together for funding sources. Furthermore, you'll recall that the state did come forward with another $26.1 million, $26.2 $26.3 million, which was then split up across the CTE centers. That translated to $3 million more dollars for our project. Equipment grants is something that those are successful. Those are in hand. That's something that Eric Ripley has helped to already pursue, and there's plans to pursue more of that. But again, just counting what dollars we have in hand. And then lastly, a portion of this project will be special assessed, so that does allow us to access our special assessment fund, anticipated to be $1.5 million. So the two numbers, if we're looking at that red column, our base bid, we might pay attention to at this point is our total cost of $30.5 million and our total dollars in hand of $24.2. So that's a gap. And that's what I've labeled here in the middle of the page as the known gap, because those are the funding sources we can count on. That gap is $6.3 million, or about 20%. But we have had a lot of promising conversations about a couple of different things. Two that I've included here is the New Markets Tax Credit, which is an investment tax credit strategy which we are eligible for. We've already received allocation in prior years and are currently pursuing allocation. This could amount to, it's speculative, could amount to $5 million, but we won't know that until October. Furthermore, the state has also said there's a couple other pots of money that they're willing to redistribute into CTE projects, but they just don't know how much yet. One pot is $26.2 million that they'd made available for broadband infrastructure across the state of North Dakota. And they said if any of that is unused by October, we'll give that back out to the CTE centers. Right now we're working with estimates. There may be $8 or $9 million left over. And if you followed some logic as to how they distributed the funds the first time, that could bring $950,000 to this project. And furthermore, should any other CTE project not be able to move forward in other communities, the state has said that they would take those dollars and reinvest into CTE centers that are moving forward. Those are a few speculative sources, and those, when added into this equation, fill out my known gap with speculative sources labeling on this document. So in that red column, your $6.3 million gap reduces to just under $400,000 gap on the base bid. So taking that explanation and moving into these other colors, if you start to add the alternates, you'll recognize that those gaps grow, both in what we know and if we're successful come speculation. On page 85 of your board packet, I just wanted to articulate what could happen as a backstop in this process. If we move forward with the base bid or these alternates, I wanted to work out and show you just what it may cost the school district and how we might finance that. The logical place would be to take any gap and secure financing secured through the building fund. So you would sign the building fund up for annual payments to get that project paid. And then you would hope to fundraise, close the gap. You wouldn't stop raising those dollars, but there certainly would be a need to finance the building fund against this project. So in the red column, the base bid, you could see based on our known gap, if October wasn't a good month for us and none of those other things came in, we may have to look at $400,000 in financing on a monthly or annual basis until we can close that gap or fundraise that off. When you move to those colors of blue or gray, those gaps increase. So the point I wanted to bring back to the Finance Committee asked me to bring back and wanted just to underscore was that there's some risk in this, and that when we've talked about the increased mill levy to the building fund and not wanting to tie too much of that up in debt service, we need to provide a backstop to make sure that this project gets completed in whatever iteration we decide on. It could have an impact on the building fund to this magnitude, and it could put us in a position, should we have some other catastrophe take place where our building fund is subscribed and then we're borrowing from the general fund. Reminiscent of recent years, we just may want to avoid that. So I wanted to make sure that that is understood. The Finance Committee did talk through much of that. I did provide some more detail here. And what I did witness in that room was a lot of support And I'd welcome even perhaps at the just end of my comments, Eric or Keith, and just how the community says, we're gonna write, and Eric with the Grand Forks Public Schools, we're gonna write more grants. The EDC as a partner is going to continue to pursue sponsorship. There was a lot of momentum from that finance committee as to how we'll close this gap, and this project will be a success. I will say, firstly, the two other alternates that were listed within the GMP, I don't have them just listed in front of me to get the right technical description of those down. There are 4 listed. We're only talking about the first 2. Those other 2 can be added in at a later date with substantial or little disruption to operations or future projects. It's not like adding on a section of the building. So they were discussed, and the Finance Committee did not recommend that we do those at this time. But for your consideration, they could be added in later at a smaller budget point and with little disruption.
Those are on electronic page 34, alternate 3, fin tube radiation, and alternate 4, folding glass walls. Those 2 combined just a shade under $500,000.
Thank you.
I can comment just really briefly on those 2 alternates. As Brandon said, those aren't building additions, so those can be decisions that can be made later. We also talked about at the Finance Committee, the alternate number 3, the fin tube radiation, is a conversation that we need to have with Jonathan and his facilities team and kind of get a recommendation from them. So all that is to say, we can push that down the line. It's not as critical today as it is the other 2 alternates.
Thank you,
Sean, for purposes of our discussion, you both talked about a timeline. When would you need an answer from us as to how we're moving forward, whether it be the project, alternate 1, 2, 3, 4, all of them, none of them, some of them?
Yeah, I'll also let Sean comment. In terms of the design, we're going to progress as if we're doing the whole project so that at the end of the day, we have documents that we can hand over to PCL so they can build the entire building. We're not going to hold on finishing out the design of the 2 alternate spaces. And I know Sean will talk about this. They're ready to start mobilizing as soon as we get the thumbs up. We're ready to start getting an early permit package to the city. Some of those things aren't as critical in terms of the decision, but there's certain schedule things that I'll have Sean talk about that are pretty critical in terms of a timeline, but he can give a better update.
So as far as work progresses this fall, what you'd see on site is earth moving, underground concrete work, and then in the middle of winter, we'll be setting a structure, steel, joists, columns, beams, whatnot. All of those things get procured really early on so that they show up during that time. So essentially, a conversation I had with Brandon earlier is it's also a slower time for building erection between December and March. So is there a case that we can provide more time on the alternates and pull the trigger later and possibly even wait till October? I think that it's fairly nominal in the amount of cost that it would add to the project, because those trades, the ones that are affected, as long as we can get that decision, my hope would be that the earth worker would still be there, the concrete crew would still be there, we'd be able to mobilize some rebar in short order to catch those foundations while those trades are still on site. So I do believe we have a longer window on the alternates. And at the worst case scenario, if we did wait until October for that decision, we may be having a gap between where the steel erector is leaving the site and coming back as some of the other trades are mobilizing. But I think it's doable and would have fairly nominal cost to kind of have them start and stop. They could erect the full base building, and then they'd fairly easily be able to add on the alternates thereafter. But I think we can catch the concrete underground and the earthwork if we were to hold off on that decision for a period of time. But there's things that we're going to do with the progression of the drawings, our shop drawing process. There will be things that we're reviewing, approving, but then putting hold points in it to say, hey, we do believe that this is the right design for the alternates. we have it all on the shelf, ready to go, so that when we do get approval, we can go to the joist manufacturer, to the steel supplier and say, ready, put it right into fabrication. We have those drawings ready to go and we're not further delayed thereafter, so.
So mostly for considerations of this board meeting, since it's under an item for action, you're saying that we don't have to make a decision on the alternates today, but preferably sooner than later.
Correct. And there is a window of time that I'd say that your window of time not impacting anything would be the month of August.
Okay.
Anything beyond that would probably start to affect some lead times, create some gap in the structural install, but I think it's doable, and it's not a drastic issue to have that crew pack up and come back a month later, so, okay, thank you.
Did you have one more thing to add?
The one critical decision that if we do want to keep the schedule is decision on the base bid drawings. Does that make, when I say that, does that make, okay, thank you.
So for purposes of our discussion today, we still haven't heard from Keith Lunnett. Brandon offered that Keith is here to answer any questions from the public partnership side. But we also have provided the guiding change document at each of your stations, so we can refer to how you make decisions financially. And then in the board packet, you'll see that the committee recommended to the board the base bid plus alternates 1 and 2. However, we certainly have more things to consider with this big kind of ask being brought to the board for the, first time with some of the extra stuff. And then Dr. Brenner also has some considerations for just our budget as a whole as well. So Keith, if you want to start just from the public partnership side.
Sure.
Are you going to buy a lottery ticket for the big money today?
All in. And the community has been all in, so maybe that was a good way to start. So President Flynn, Superintendent Brenner, members of the school board. I'm Keith Lund, President, CEO of the Grand Forks Region Economic Development Corporation, part of the steering committee that really worked on this. And I just want to step back for those of you who were at the Finance Committee. Apologize, this will be a little bit of a repeat. I actually did some math. It was 32 months since we started working on this project. We had a little bit of inkling that the special session of the legislature in 2021 was going to add some funding to support the expansion of CTE centers across the state of North Dakota. As Mr. Ripley has said many times, there had been funding for programs, but not for bricks and mortar, for infrastructure. And so we really wanted to make sure that Grand Forks, the community, was in position to take advantage and leverage that decision that we thought was going to be made by the legislature and ultimately was. It's really been 20 months since the application went in, and we expected to have some funding. But stepping back, early in 2021, put a core team together. President Flynn, you were part of a group, at least one trip that we took to look at these centers across the country. After we put that core group together, we really thought, let's go. We put 6 different working groups together, and I probably missed something and retitled them, but we had focus on curriculum and building design and which site we were going to be looking at, community engagement, how are we communicating this and getting the community involved in the decision, student engagement, which was a really fun sort of part of this exercise, a lot of the design. I think the architects and Mr. Ripley will share with you that a lot of input from the students. And then industry engagement, which is a fancy word for fundraising. So we put a core team together to do that. In September 2021, we made our first ask, and I just looked, and at the end of November, we reached our $10 million goal. We've added $1 million since then, but we were able to raise $11 million through the community to support this project, which was a really exciting time. So many people, I won't even begin to start mentioning names other than the few that are here, but the community really leaned into this. And just to let you know, again, as a bit of a repeat from last week, but there's no other CTE center that had the city and the county and the school district and the Economic Development Corporation and the chamber all financially invest in that. In addition, 68 individual businesses invested somewhere between $1,000 and $1 million to sort of pull this funding together. And there were a couple of individuals. Thank you. There's people to thank at the table here today, as well as some foundations that kind of leaned into this. So it really is a community project. And I've never seen really the community come together. Maybe after the flood, there was a lot of leaning into different things. But I've never seen since that time the community really rally and support a project like this. So I really thank you for your time and deliberation today, and I think this is an exciting time. It's been so long since we started that somehow, we get tied up in the grind of this. But, when this decision is made, and I guess I don't want to anticipate some things, but I sure am, that I think this is going to be a really great opportunity for the community to celebrate. I think what Mr. Baumbach was asking me to talk about was a little bit of the opportunity to raise some additional funding through some of the community, through our community partners. Just taking a look at the funding, so we raised $11 million, and I'm going to do a little bit of rounding because it's a lot easier. $6.5 million of that came from private sources, and $4.5 million from public and quasi-public sources, city, county, school district, EDC, and the like. We have, on at least a couple of occasions, given updates to the business community that supported this project and indicated that we may need to come back and have a conversation about adding a little bit more dollars, because we all, in any industry, experience significant escalation in costs. No one to blame, I guess, other than COVID and supply chains, but nevertheless that they were real. So if we took that private sector funding and we were able to raise 10%, that's $650,000. If we did 20%, that's 1.3. I like 20%, and one of our investors suggested, he just asked, and a lot of investors made their commitment over a 5-year period of time. Some 3, some already wrote the check, but most over a 5-year period of time. And one of our investors suggested, ask us if we could do one more check on the 6th year and just add 20%, so no additional cash flow disruption during that time frame, but see if we're able to do that. That's a cash flow consideration, but that's additional resources to the project. On a couple of occasions, we have indicated to our supporters that we may need to do that. I will say that nobody has said, no way, don't call me. But I also haven't said, I haven't heard where can I send the check. So I certainly can't guarantee how much would come in. I'm certain that our supporters would roll up their sleeves and do what they could. And I'm confident in saying there will be additional resources to support some of the other, speculative resources that Mr. Baumbach and I think Mr. Ripley outlined here today. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm thrilled we're at near a decision point, because it has been, in some respects, it seems like just yesterday. In other respects, it seems like it was a lifetime ago. But it's really great to be here this evening.
Any questions or comments for Keith Lund? Go ahead.
Keith, I'll just put you on the spot. Did you talk to any of the investors about naming rights for the building? I mean, I look back at Choice's, the naming rights for Choice was almost $3 million. Icon was $2 million. Would any of the donors be offended if we went after a naming right person for, say, the sum of 2.5, whatever it is? Would they be with their donation?
President Flynn, Mr. Palmasino, I guess we haven't asked anyone that question. That was something that we saw on our trips. A couple of different things. There were some naming opportunities, the such and such a room. I don't want to pick on one company right now, elevate one at the expense of another, but you can just make your own. Also, I think we heard that there was a real race to have a company-specific equipment installed, so that the students were learning on their specific equipment, and also name recognition in terms of a potential employer down the road. So think of a diesel mechanic as an example, or welding company or something like that. Maybe not a great example since we might not do that one, but just really think of any of the labs. Mm-hmm. So that was something that we saw. There's a number of sort of avenues that we can pursue. We had discussed the possibility, answering a question that you didn't ask, about maybe approaching the business community before this time, but really through a discussion we realized that we could only do this once, and we really didn't know what that gap was, and so we were going to, I think rightfully wait until that number was known and what we needed to go. So long answer, haven't had the direct conversations with companies.
Okay. Well, I would imagine when we're done here, we're going to have a donor wall within the
Absolutely.
building with all the names up of who donated it. But that naming rights on the front of the building is an opportunity for us to really secure a large donor. I'm sure it'll be over 20 years whatever it is, but that's another avenue to really pick up some
That's right.
large cash.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Brenner, did you want to share macro level?
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, what I'd like to say is I've been part of this parade, and it's been a great parade for our community and for all the interagency connections, sponsorships, pledges, et cetera. So what I have to say tonight, I don't want to rain on this parade at all. But I do want to hearken back to 4 years ago when our budget was in the middle of a storm, and we just don't want to be back in that storm again. And we've made a commitment to our community through the referendum that we had in the spring, through the referendum that we had in September of 2021 when we raised our building fund from 10 mils to 20 mils. Josh Anderson served on the Facilities Task Force, 23 meetings, 60-plus hours, and I think at every one of those meetings over COVID during Zoom meetings, the question was asked, how do you not get into this financial situation again? So we're not tapping into the general fund. So while I'm all in, moving this project forward, getting shovels in the ground, it's an exciting time, most notably exciting for our students, so we can put some kids from school to work in a hurry, in some high-paying occupations, might I add, and stay in our community. That's truly exciting. My concern is if we do the build with both alternates, you've already heard about the gap, and if all of the what-ifs don't come through, and then we start leaning on that building fund, then we are back to where we were 4 years ago. So if we lose a boiler at one of our facilities, there's $1 million that comes right out of our building fund. We already have $1 million tied up in the bonding of 14.3, 14.4 for all of the projects that we have going on. So I worry about a $8 million-ish gap with the Career Impact Academy from start to finish. I worry that we did the right thing. I don't worry that we did the right thing. We did the right thing with all of our compensation packages, but that's a $2 million deficit that goes in, that's perpetual, year after year after year, so we have to find ways to make up for that. Central Pool still looms at $1 to $3 million, and we haven't decided on what that path forward is. So when you just start putting some of those pieces together, we do put our finances a bit at risk. We did work through the guiding change document that President Flynn referenced here a few minutes ago, and if we want our ending fund balance to be at 15% by 2026, continue with our fruitful compensation packages for 1,600 people on payroll, I think we really have to pay attention to what we land on here this evening. So I want to bookend it with a positive, because I started with a positive, that I don't want my comments to be perceived as any other way than just being fiscally responsible, so we don't have an embarrassing situation staring at us in the face.
Any questions or comments? Dr. Lund?
One quick comment and then two quick questions. And I'm sorry, Keith, about this comment, but I think we should have all of our presenters named Sean in the future. It makes it easier. It makes it easier for us. So two quick questions. One is, since I'm not on finance, so I don't know anything about this, do we need to talk about the land swap adjacent to the Career Impact Academy before we vote on this stuff? Is that something that's important or not? Because I don't know anything about it. And then secondly, for any of the Seans or the Keiths out there, what cost savings do we get by doing alternative 1 and 2 when we build the building? In other words, if we truly can't afford it, how much extra money does it cost to build it in 2 years or 3 years if Keith works his magic and we get more funding and we say, yeah, we can afford it? Because I have a tendency to agree with Dr. Brenner. I know it's better to build as you're building, but there is a more cost to building it in the future. And I'm not talking about inflation. I'm just talking about, you've sent all the construction away and then a year or two later, you got to bring them back and dig and stuff.
Sean, before you answer that, I'll pipe in. So I think it's important as a conversation to talk about the land swap because that wouldn't even be a consideration of a phase until later. I think, those certainly can be counted as two different items. But just for the process of the board, because this is under action could also mean that we postpone any decision, that we modify, that we do, what have you. So, for example, for your second question, Dr. Lund, we did talk about what if we just did the frame and we just roughed in with insulation and left everything, and we asked the gentleman to see if they could maybe tweak some numbers, but that also could be an option. And so for the purposes of this meeting, we didn't, although at the time the information we had, we decided to bring the recommendation forward to add in alternates 1 and 2. We also didn't want it to feel like we were forcing the board's hand to make a decision today, especially because the timeline does allow a small wiggle room of flexibility in our decision, but also we did have some lingering questions to bring back, and that was one of them. So,
to speak to what added costs would be later, escalation's kind of a huge,
a significant amount of money's already spent that would then, for lack of a better word, get thrown in the garbage. So.
At the Finance Committee, I also mentioned that we were weighing if we were going to do one alternate versus the other. There's pros and cons to both options, right? The commons is, if you do that later, that affects an entrance to the building and some thoroughfare in and out of the site and the bus traffic. If you do the welding later, it's kind of off to the side, maybe a little bit more appetizing for that, but it's also program space that you're delaying versus event space or a different use. So both pros and cons.
while you're up here, do we want to transition just slightly to question number 2? Because I know there's a picture of it, and then maybe we can handle the items one by one. But I know you had some considerations just in terms of space and layout and where things are at as well.
So again, jumping back to the site plan, the property in question is this triangular lot to the south. We've intentionally designed a project that you see on the screen that doesn't need that lot in order to move forward with the project. In other words, that lot is independent of our current project to date. But the other lot in question is the one to the northeast, which is currently owned by the school district. Private developer owns the triangular lot. And I don't know, Ms. Flynn, if there's anything else I should hit on.
No, I think just from the design perspective, that was helpful. Brandon, do you want to maybe give an overview of that memo that we received?
Yeah, well, thank you. Just to kind of highlight that, we were approached by the owner of that vacant bank property for a land swap with that northeast corner property. What we did with that was both Eric Ripley and I had gone over to tour the bank, and our quick analysis was there may not be value in the bank itself or a lot of that concrete and parking that you see there. And so we just immediately said, if we contemplated this land swap, would you be open to demoing all that out and then trading? And the response was yes. So I think the concept more than anything is really driving at a restoration back to greenfield, or just vacant property, which would preserve our point of view from 42nd Avenue and ensure against a neighbor that we wouldn't want right next door to our project. That's the concept. The memo on electronic page 86, having worked with Ryan Bone out of Prairie Real Estate, there's actually a separate entity within there. It's Square Foot Commercial Group. And that on purpose delineates, it just meant to show his day job is not selling homes and then he does this on the side. This is what he does, is he values commercial space in Grand Forks. It is not a full appraisal, but you can see he considered both parcels, the northeast corner being 1.15 acres with no building on it, better vantage from Gateway, He approximated that $8 a square foot or just over $400,000 in value. And then the bank, the property with the vacant bank is 1.057 acres. You don't have quite that curb appeal from Gateway Drive, but he does note that, that you have to exit on 42nd to come around and enter that corner property. There won't be any exit from Gateway directly onto that property, so he thought that was actually made those parcels in value a little bit more equal. And he put that somewhere between $6 and $7 a square foot. So if you take the even lower value of that at $276,000, you can't ignore, even though it may not be in our interest, the value of the building that sits upon that. And so he has included that too at $80 a square foot, so $228,000. All told, you're talking about a land swap of the corner lot, which is the school district's property, of $400,000 to be swapped with the vacant bank and triangle property at $500,000. Of course, on top of that, the owner is willing to demo that knowing our future use, but the current value on that property is $500,000 here. The Finance Committee did discuss that. Didn't want to bring that to the board, I think, for any action tonight, but more further discussion. Also, we are waiting on the city attorney to transfer that land and our project land here, which should be happening very soon. But I've taken the time to also order an appraisal on that to shore up that valuation and would come back. But to answer your initial question, Dr. Lund, this land swap contemplated budget neutral for the sake of the project.
Wouldn't the other advantage of having that is potential building expansion or parking and stuff like that? It makes more sense to have the old bank, the old Alaris Bank stuff there. And do you think the developer who wants to do the land swap would maybe want to throw in a little cash as a donation for?
That's currently not a part of the deal, although it was asked for.
Thank you for that. I think because we had some interweaving of questions and area, it was important to talk about that as well. We'll have some discussion on item A. So if there's any lingering questions or comments on that. Go ahead, Dr. Lund.
Well, I guess I'm a little worried about overspending on something. I guess I think I like it. I'd like to have all four alternatives, but I'm a little worried, and I'm not usually that conservative. But I think, without doing any of the alternatives, we're going to get an excellent building, an excellent functional building that's going to really enhance our CTE program. And then I would think then we look at how do we get other funding to do some of these other alternatives. I realize it'd be better to build it all at once, but I hate to hamstring future boards, future superintendents, future taxpayers with getting back to where we were financially a few years ago. It wasn't fun to do, I can tell you that.
My question's probably a little broader in terms of education and careers. So where is welding in as a career in the future?
Where's it now?
Well, where is it now? So my recent example of welding is that I had a bed frame that broke, and I took a bed frame, because remember, I'm in the furniture business now too, over to a welding company that I had never interacted with before, and it cost $25 to fix, and I think everyone told me that was too expensive, but probably took them, 2 minutes to do it. So that was my first experience with welding, and my only one. So where is it as a career?
Sure. So it's an excellent question. So I can certainly speak towards, as Keith mentioned, the 6 breakout groups that worked on the application. I was fortunate enough to spearhead the education committee that looked at the programming for this facility. And we really looked at three key metrics when we looked at selecting programs. First was student interest. These are elective courses. Students are choosing to not only partake in them, they're also choosing to deal with the logistics of getting to and from the facility, whether you're in town or out of town. The second was a regional training opportunities beyond high school. So we have post-secondary partners, University of North Dakota, Northland Community Technical College, and East Grand Forks, Lake Region State College. Because some of these programs align well with a 2-year technical program. Some certainly lend themselves well to 4 or advanced degree options as well. And then the third metric was in-demand career need. We wanted to look at this facility as an opportunity to keep our talent local. And so through the exposure at the high school level, additional training at the post-secondary level, we could help fill that talent pipeline. And I think that really is the catalyst that brought our 68-plus industry partners to the table. So welding certainly hit one of those. I would say specifically what was intriguing about welding was that it is not a program that is offered at any of our participating schools at the high school level. That is a program, when we think about bringing in not only students in town, but rurally, that is certainly a program that draws some interest because they don't have that opportunity to them right now. I know we have employers in town, and Keith had to make the very difficult call to some of those to say, welding is an expansion, it's an alternate, may not be in the original offer. And does that affect their commitment to this project? Now, fortunately, they're very civic-minded. They support the concept and the project, but obviously we're disappointed because they see welding as a pipeline potentially preparing future workforce for their industries. And there's a post-secondary training program at Northland, obviously, so the ability to articulate. So when Sean referenced the pros and cons, as was talked about the finance committee between the commons and the welding is very specific instructional space. Commons is probably more broad in terms of use for all programs. And so a person can make an argument for both. I think everybody's of the mindset of you do things right the first time, and there's a reason why those facilities and that building was designed the way that it was within that. But I also understand the financial conversation that's occurring within the board right now. It was also referenced, about equipment and grants. I'm just going to dovetail a little bit on that. I'd be happy to speak towards that. One of the things that we saw in our tours was, and specific to CTE, is funding for equipment. And I can run through a real quick list for you. We've received 2 large grants to date that total close to $900,000. One was through the Regional Workforce Investment Program, all for equipment. One was through the Economic Development Administration, $520,000 for equipment for this facility. CTE gets federal funding each year called the Carl Perkins Funds. That's roughly $200,000 annually to the school district for the purposes of supporting equipment for CTE programs. That's an annual accumulation. The state of North Dakota has had some grants, received $50,000 in a grant last year to purchase a piece of equipment for medical careers. And then the North Dakota Department of CTE has updated their funding policy. And their new funding policy that took into effect July 1 references that new CTE programs will be reimbursed 75% of all approved costs for the first year of implementation if provided by a CTE center. And all approved costs would include salaries, benefits, supplies, equipment, and any other expenses to be able to put that program on. So there's obviously an investment from the state, in addition to what they've already provided, to try to help support new programs. I bring that up as we talk about new programs for this facility. Welding, as I referenced, is new to everybody. Culinary is another one, and culinary is a very expensive, equipment-heavy lab. And so there's that. And then we had a handful of our industry donors that referenced during the pledge process their willingness to donate in-kind donations of equipment once we've identified what those asks are. I think that was something that President Flynn could reference as well during her visits, that we had a lot of industries that were referencing in these other centers about how, not that it's an easy ask, but that they're willing to provide the equipment necessary to train the students. So hopefully that's a long-winded answer to your question. I apologize for that, but thank you for letting me go through that.
Thank you. Bill, did you have a question or comment? Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Eric, for coming to the podium. I just have mostly to answer Cynthia's question. So several years ago, so first of all, as Eric would know, I'm a big CTE supporter. He and I have crossed paths many times in the classroom, and both coming out of CTE areas. So I think this is going to be a wonderful building. But when I was still at Schrader with Catherine, we had a Girls Who Code club, and we had the opportunity, because Eric was in his director position at that point in time, to travel to the North Dakota School of Science in Wahpeton. And one of the biggest programs, I don't remember what year that was, Eric, it was several years ago now.
Probably about 6, 7 years ago, I would say, yeah.
I think so. One of the biggest programs they had down there was welding, and they had it was almost like gaming. They had this crazy console, and I'm not a gamer, so I won't pretend to imitate, but they talked about, and I think the Bakken was in full steam at that point in time, and they talked about they had entire welding classes picked up by whatever company was out in Williston, Watford City at that point in time, and they hired entire classes of welders, and they paid for the remainder of their schooling because they were in such need of people who had that skill. So I think about that, and I think I can see that importance. I don't see it in my daily life. I don't weld much, but I can see it in certainly in other career areas. And then I think about the commons, and I think about, so our daughter is a senior this coming year at Red River, and she's very, very interested in biomedical engineering. And so we have toured some really amazing facilities, and one of the most interesting facilities we toured was in Eugene at Oregon State or I can never remember.
University of Oregon.
The Duck School, as I like to refer to it. And anyway, they talked about their building is amazing because they have Phil Knight donating all of this money, and they have this amazing commons in the midst of this amazing science building. And I asked them why that was so important, because I hadn't seen that yet. And they talked about the commons was so important because it gave those scientific, like-minded kids an opportunity to sit and chat and collaborate and come up with ideas. And I think about those conversations or things I've experienced just from my family personally. And I think about how important they're going to be for our kids. But then I also think about what Eric said in terms of finances. And I really worry about the overall impact of adding expansions number 1 and 2. And so I want to say, so support the CTE building. I think it's so important for so many of our kids, but I worry about that as well. So I don't know, I just wanted to say thank you, but yeah, it's a tough decision. Thank you.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. Are you looking for a motion? I would like to make one.
Okay.
You ready? I'd like to just make a motion that we move forward with the base bid for construction at $24,983,859 tonight. And then I think we have time till November when Brandon will get more information on the little projects that may come through with the extra money that would help us down the road to add alternates for it. But at least we get the base bid moving and we get the building moving forward and we don't lose the prices that we have now.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Go ahead.
Just a question, because I had heard like August or September. I didn't
Yeah,
hear
not November.
I just wanted to find out
Yeah.
from, what are we talking about?
A couple things. August, September is
Ideal.
Is ideal.
Yeah.
November would be, I think, the point where you'd start incurring more costs in order to make it happen. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I wanted to mention is when we're approving a number, we should also include that 5% contingency in that construction number. As many had said, contingency for any project is critical because things come up and we want to make sure that money is set aside. If it doesn't get used, it doesn't get used, but it's there in case we need it. So
Well, that's the point I want to make, though, that 1.2 million is our money to spend.
correct.
Correct. So
Correct.
if we don't spend any of it, we could put in a welding lab with $1.2 million. Just tell it, but I'm sure that we're going to use some of it, but that's what that's there for. And that's why I didn't include it, because I consider that our money. But if you want to include it, then my motion would be for $26,233,052.
Okay. Any other discussion?
I just have a point of clarification.
Go ahead.
Eric, you first.
I just had a question more to Brandon and all the Seans in the audience. Is 2 weeks, I mean, we meet again in August. Are we going to have any more information in 2 weeks or maybe in September or something? I'm just asking kind of a time frame of things.
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of information that you're looking for that could really affect this probably comes in October. I don't think that there's likely new information in 2 weeks. I think also in October comes escalated costs, but you know, with new market tax credit and any additional from the state. And Keith, if he's, how fast was it you said? Could we?
Yeah, 14 days is nothing at this point. I think Dave and I and Dr. Brenner can talk about if there's any value to add it to the agenda in August again for other discussion that's maybe non-monetary stuff, but we'll have that conversation considering there's other information that would take us longer than that. So we have a motion and a second, and then an amended motion and a second. Any more discussion? Go ahead.
I'm just wondering how we're going to decide the alternate 1 and 2 for commons and welding. I mean, what about, just to help with discussion, you know how you do pros of this and pros of that?
Mm-hmm.
If it came down to even getting one of those,
Mm-hmm.
how to decide between, I don't know if we'd have talking points for those.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's something that we can talk with Dr. Brenner about adding to the August agenda in preparation for some of those conversations. We can, ask Mr. Ripley to come with some of those, PCL, GLG.
And maybe think about, okay, if you don't get a commons, what can you do with that flexible space?
Yep.
What can you, you know what I mean?
Yep.
To substitute for a commons.
Sure. I think that's great. So right now we're deciding to move the base bid forward with that owner's contingency. I'll call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so we voted on the amendment. One second. We voted on the amendment to add the owner's contingency, so now we have to vote on the motion that's amended. Okay, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Mr. Lund.
President Flynn, this is out of order, but I really had to come up and say thank you for your support, all the school board members. I won't repeat what I said earlier, but on behalf of the community and the business community, thank you for your support in taking on this critical project.
Thank you. Now we're moving on to item number 2. We've heard from our engineering team and Brandon. Dr. Brenner, did you have any points of consideration for item number 2?
On the land swap? No,
Yes.
No.
Okay. So at this point, Brandon indicated that he has sought the services to get an appraisal, and the city attorney is working on getting that officially changed. So it's under action, but I would suggest that we postpone this item.
I'll make a motion that we postpone this item till a future date.
Okay.
Second.
Motion from Dr. Lund, second from Dr. Schab. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carried. Okay, thank you. We're now on item 3, consideration of preliminary budget and tax levy for FY24. Brandon?
President Flynn, members of the board, North Dakota Century Code states that our school districts must levy, speaking's difficult tonight, must levy our taxes by August 10th. and also set a public hearing date for prior to October 10th. This document, the SFN 9149, is the public school district budget and tax levy, a certificate of levy. So it's exactly the document to do that. In summary of this document, you'll see on the first page, which is electronic page 89, are the property tax levy, important component of this. Nothing here has changed significantly except one of these rows. Our general fund property tax levy was at 70 mils last year. Our tuition fund was at 4 mils. And our miscellaneous fund was at 12 mils, so there's no change. As far as our Fund Group 2 Special Reserve Fund at 3 mils, no change. Our building fund levy's been at 20 mils, and our special assessment fund's at 2. No changes there. The change falls in a new bucket for us in recent years, is our sinking and interest fund levy, which is relevant to the referendum that was passed. The 20.68 mil levy is the anticipated value that would reach $79 million in accumulation over the next 20 years. That number will adjust, especially as we leverage financing mechanisms made available to the Bank of North Dakota, like the School Construction Loan Program, as that interest rate will be provided to us at 2% rather than market rate, which is more than 4%. So when we do take those actions, that's a savings to our taxpayers and a big thank you to the Bank of North Dakota. So total mill levy here that's being put forward and would be open for public hearing and conversation is 131.68 mils. And on a positive note, just as we get into the rest of the budget here, is we've seen property tax valuation increase in our community like we haven't seen in some years. And on average, within these buckets here is an 8.44% increase, which is significant and helps the school district afford the things that we're doing. As you go through this document, it's a little bit different than the format in which we normally report finances. This is the way that the state STARS report asks for it. So the buckets are just a little bit different. One thing to keep in mind is this is a preliminary budget, which again, it's meant to get our intention out there, especially on the mill levy. But on these expenditures, they will change. We're at the point in the year, and you'll hear this on the financial statement update, the next agenda item. The numbers are still coming in from the previous year, so we're still looking at all those numbers to inform this next year's budget. Of course, especially as we incorporate any details from the negotiated agreement that's changed. So it's preliminary, and we'll come back in front of the board before October 10th. First are the expenditures or the appropriations. Just a couple things worth noting. Operations, maintenance of plant, that will decrease because of some of the investments made with the guaranteed energy savings. So when they talked about switching out all those light bulbs and switching over to hot water versus steam, we're expecting savings within that bucket, which will help us in our next year's budget. Also, what's helpful is we're no longer leveraging our general fund construction services dollars, and we can rely on the building fund. All very relevant to the conversation we just had. So that is helping this budget show a total expenses of $127.2 million. This is also still including that last and final year of ESSER dollars, so it's going to be a higher number, which will come down in future years. As you move on, electronic page 93 starts the revenue side, your local sources, your state sources, and your federal sources. One question I had received on the state sources of revenue, which is electronic page 94, near the bottom, 3410, special education joint agreements. That's a unique relationship, like when you have Upper Valley provide services to your school, you have a revenue line attached to that. When we are providing services to students who belong to a different district, those fall within tuition lines. So just wanted to clarify why there wouldn't be anything in that line. Moving forward into federal sources kind of rounds out the revenues, and those are primarily formula-based, and we get our numbers. All told, the revenue comes on page 97 of $127.279 million. The summary for all of this is the bottom of page 97, and you'll see revenue of $127.279 and expenditures of $127.214. So that's already some of that preliminary work. It's a net of $65,000. There's a lot of questions in this, and so we still have to tweak these numbers, but this is sort of the best projections we're giving right now for a preliminary budget. So there'll be more work to be done, but what I would be requesting tonight is a motion to approve the public school district budget and tax levy, the certificate of levy, which is SFN 9149, and to set the public hearing date of September 25th at 6 p.m. in this room.
Do I have a motion?
Second.
Motion by Bill, second by Dave. Any discussion? All those in favor, go ahead.
This just popped into my head, so I apologize. The revenue on page 97, total revenue from state sources, does that include revenue for the CTE in that budget?
No. I don't think so right now, so we'll have to work that in. And the way that process would work is as you spend, then it'd be a reimbursement process. And the reason it hasn't been included is because there's a couple entities at play, which we have to figure precisely those details. But for example, all of those donations we've received to date, about $3 million, they're actually held within the foundation. And in order to leverage new market tax credit, there may be another entity at play. So to save a long explanation, but to answer the question, it's not in here right now. Sorry for that vague answer.
Actually, that's helpful, because then it doesn't include that money locally wouldn't be in there either, because it's with the foundation. I think that's good to know. Thank you.
That's correct. And also, we could, you could request those monies and account for them in our building fund, which would be a capital expenditure fund, which might be a better place than our general fund. So there's a number of considerations.
Any additional questions or comments, discussion? Go ahead.
Brendan, what are school board services? It's on page 90, electronic page 90, 0002310. What is that?
A lot of things, and I should have actually looked, I promised to look in line by line there, but it's a number of different services. So actually, a good example here is if we pay for an appraisal to investigate a school board determination decision like a land swap, that could come out of there. So I meant to look with having some better examples than that, but it's not reflective of salaries of school board members or something. It's more about supporting the resources needed to make informed decisions at the board table.
Any additional questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carried. We'll now move on to the general fund financial statement. Brandon?
Yeah, so as exciting as this time is, where you want to look back and you say, well, how did we turn out? And this is a financial statement for July 1 of last year through June 30 of this current calendar year. It's not an accurate picture, unfortunately. So you'll see the summary here for the first 12 months for the entirety of the year. The total general fund revenues were $115 million, whereas the expenditures were $118.8 million. At this point, we know our expenditures, but what lags is a lot of the federal reimbursement. So as we've paid JLG's most recent bill on ESSER dollars, we need to go through a process of reimbursement, and they don't hit the books yet. We work for the better part of August and September, and sometimes even a little bit longer than that, to wrap up the books from the prior year as we get it ready for the audit. So unfortunately, that's not an accurate depiction of the picture. When we project what dollars were anticipated yet to come, accounts receivable, we're looking at a positive. We're looking right on budget from where we had budgeted. And there's still a couple of other considerations that'll be brought for your consideration, like a special reserve fund transfer, as we would be eligible to do that this year. Just a couple of points on this, though, as inaccurate as it is. If you look at page 100, the first page, in the general fund financial statement, you'll see those revenues, local, state, and federal. You can see all the percentage column, which is nearer the right, is 99.3% of local sources. And that's as close as we'll get there. Some people don't pay their taxes, so we don't quite get it right. For local or state sources, that's about right on 100.3. And then for our federal sources, 80.4. So those federal reimbursements that we're waiting to come in, and you can see the furthest right column that's $4 million as well. So it'll come into a clearer picture. Most of the document is reflective of recent months. I think last month where the comments aren't any different on page 103, which is the start of that second statement, which is year over year. But kind of going through here, what I'll point your attention to is the graphic depiction on page 106. You can see that as a percentage of budget, you can see revenues are slightly higher than in previous years. And the next page of 107, as a percentage of budget, you'll see that expenditures are less than previous years. And then, of course, if you look at that general fund balance, they all look a little wonky. Like, for example, last year, so referencing page 108, and that far right-hand column is June, and this is a general fund balance, a dollar amount. What this is showing is that we're all right around $5 million, when last year that was north of $9 million carryover. So we talk about our guiding change document and 15% of budget. It's this graph. It just needs time to be accurate and reflect that. With that explanation, I'd be happy to answer any other questions. Otherwise, I'd be seeking a motion to approve the general fund statement as presented.
Any questions? Okay, I have a motion for approval. Dr. Lund, is there a second? Second by Josh. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. We'll now move on to the consent agenda. I'll seek a motion for those items. Moved by Dr. Shab. Is there a second? Second by Bill. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. We'll now move on to item 7D, third-party individual entity requests for student information. Dr. Brenner?
Thank you, Madam President. Page 128 of your electronic packet. I'll just go through the memo so everything is crystal clear regarding these 4 applications for this procedure. Policy FGA, Student Education Records and Privacy, requires board approval of student information sharing or requests from third-party individuals or entities other than parties to which the district reports student information under law. Policy also requires a superintendent to maintain a master list of all individuals and entities having access to student information, including school district personnel, by title. The first request comes from Edgenuity, otherwise known as Imagine Learning. This is an electronic web-based platform that replaces Edmentum. You probably remember Edmentum, Monty. And it's primarily used for credit recovery in high school and a little bit in middle school. It also provides an alternative learning pathway for students and some acceleration as well. School official exception applies, so parents' consent is not required to release applicable student information. The second one is Active Internet Technologies, otherwise known as Final Site. This is replacing Blackboard, or Blackboard has been bought out by Final Site. It's a school system-wide notification system that will be used to communicate vital information to families and employees, otherwise known as part of our mass notification system through multiple channels. Their master terms and conditions are on file, which coincides with the language in the policy. School official exception applies, so parental consent is not required to release applicable student information. The third one is PeachChar, and this replaces Kids Connection. So those of you who are parents recall receiving Kids Connection. That includes information from Choice Fitness, YMCA, all kinds of summer activities, spring activities, whoever wants to promote their advertising on a once per month messaging system. This will now turn over to PeachChar, which also gives us a little bit of a revenue stream, because now that people who want to advertise or get their message out to our parents and families, they'll have to pay a nominal fee to do that. So we think this is a bit of a win-win for the district as well. And the final one is, and you'll probably see more of these coming from some of our universities who place practicum students, field experience students, and student teachers. This one comes from UND to make sure that Students can actually student teach. They have access to our students. In some cases, they have access to student information, i.e. parent-teacher conferences, sitting in on IEPs, et cetera. So those would be the four entities that we're bringing for you tonight with a recommendation to approve those four.
Any questions or comments? Go ahead, Dr. Lund.
I would suggest that you and Mr. Berger and Dr. Brenner have a conversation about whether this could be put into consent agenda. They're completely vetted by administration. I think we have little input into it. Seems like a perfect one that could maybe go into consent, so I'll leave that for you guys. And then I'll make a motion that we approve all of them.
Okay, thank you for your comment. There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Okay, Dr. Schaap. Yeah. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. We're now on to the request for reconsideration of instructional resources. Do we have an appetite just to keep rolling? Do we need a break for 2 minutes? Okay. So as you can see in the memo, we will be discussing each of the books. What I would like is for everyone to give comment about the books in order of the back page, starting with 19 minutes, and we'll end with Dead Until Dark. And then each book, we will take a separate vote to determine if the book will sustain, where it will sustain, etc. My only just point of clarification for Cindy is some individuals submitted comments on the Google form, and some may have brought paper copies. Will those, do you want the paper copies, and will the Google form go into the official minutes for the next meeting?
If it's not presented here, it doesn't go into the meeting minutes.
Okay. Okay. If it's not presented in the packet, it wouldn't go into the official meeting minutes.
Not if it wasn't returned and completed. Yes.
But then where does that go?
But the clarification to my right is if it's
Yeah.
not presented here, then.
So it will be a open record document, but it's not in official capacity of the meeting minutes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we will start with 19 minutes. Cynthia, I don't want to pick on you, but since you're first one here and we can horseshoe, any comments, concerns, questions?
I'm sorry, so, did you want to go through each question?
We're just going to start with 19 minutes,
Yeah,
and then
I
we'll
mean-
each provide comments.
Oh.
You can discuss however you want, or just general overview of comments, and then I'll call for a vote after everyone's commented.
Okay, so I don't have this really written down, this statement that I'm going to make, but I don't think that there's one passage, section, page, or chapter that formed my opinion on this book or any of the books. So I could have said, I can say that for every book, really. So I think in the future, the policy committee might want to think about that particular question, but also the procedure in general. So for me, this book, 19 minutes, there are no winners in this book. And I think that that's a powerful message for people to hear, for teens in particular. I think it's a powerful book for teens to read since there's so many relatable issues, themes such as bullying, fitting in, friendships, dating, parent-child relationships. I could go on. It's a difficult story. It's a difficult book to read. I think of the books to read as assigned, this one had a certain racing quality to it that I found difficult. Unfortunately, it's a story that's played out all across the country with school shootings. So those were kind of my comments. I still think it should be sustained in the district.
Thank you. Dr. Lund?
I have some general comments, but I'll wait till we're done with all the books. My only question about a couple of these going into it was that are in the middle schools, is sixth graders appropriate or not? And to be honest, after I read 19 minutes, one of the complaints didn't even pertain to what they talked about. It was completely different. It was wrong. I have no concerns keeping this in the respective libraries, but I am curious if other people had thoughts about middle school versus high school in some of these. So.
Bill?
Yeah, my only concern was the middle school age for this book, and I just felt it should be restricted to high school.
Josh?
I would share the same concern. I don't feel this belongs in middle school for sure. Does it, if we're strictly looking at and going by, does it meet the criteria for, being removed? I go directly to pervasively vulgar. Does it meet that? No. Do I feel there's content that isn't appropriate in any of our schools? Probably. So, but for sure, middle school.
Dave?
I'm going to take the opposite approach as Dr. Lund and give my general comments that will apply to all of the books, and then get specifically into 19 minutes. So I have four things that I think pertain to all of these. One of them is exactly what Cynthia was talking about. A team of specialists has already reviewed these books. So I do want to make sure that at the end of this discussion, tonight or some other night, we talk about this process. There's already been a determination, and I can list the experts, but they're in our minutes from December. In my opinion, the recommendations of such committees should only be reversed for compelling educational or pedagogical reasons, and not for ideological reasons. So that's number one. Okay, 3 to go. Parents and guardians should certainly be equipped to make choices for their own children, but they have no right to make decisions for others. Those who object to these books are entitled to their view, but they may not impose it on others. That's number 2. 2 down, 2 to go. We have constitutional considerations and a responsibility not to give in to these pressures to suppress unpopular or controversial ideas. 1982 Supreme Court Board of Education versus Pico, the Supreme Court cautioned that school officials may not remove books from library shelves simply because they dislike the ideas contained in those books and seek by their removal to prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion. This constitutional duty applies with particular force in the school library, which, unlike the classroom, has, and this is now a Fifth Circuit opinion from 1995, the school library has a special role as a place where students may freely and voluntarily explore diverse topics. And finally, no one is being forced to read these materials, but removing the books violates the rights of children whose parents and guardians want them to read challenging material that may be reflective of their own experiences and to encounter the book's valuable lessons. The role of a school library is to allow students to make choices according to their own interests, experiences, and family values. Removing these books would be antithetical to individual freedom, democracy, and a good education, the right to read, inquire, question, and think for ourselves. This applies for me in all 6 of these cases. And now on to 19 Minutes, which is one of only 2 books on our list that is at present not in the school libraries, but prior to this challenge, was available at both Schrader and Valley. And when we get on to Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, was available at Schrader. So I'll read the comments. I screenshotted my Google sheet. It's very short. In my opinion, 19 Minutes is educationally suitable as a library resource. The novel enables students to engage with difficult subjects like bullying and dating violence. Furthermore, the author raises important questions about the role of parenting, such as on page 126, and society as a whole, page 252. Sustain.
I don't know what to say after that. Thank you. Captured a lot of my thoughts as well. And I think in a lot of these, students have the right to decide what they want to check out, and their parents can help have that conversation at home. In this one, I didn't necessarily make a recommendation either way, but one of my comments was that it may be more suitable for a high school audience, similar to Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. Monty?
And I would agree with what Dave and Cynthia have said so far. I would also lean on, you talked about the professionals that made the decision in December, but also in all of our school libraries. We have incredibly talented librarians who know their students. And I think that we have not represented our school librarians or given them the trust and faith that they deserve in terms of, oftentimes a student will come into a school library and ask for, hey, I like this, what would you recommend I read? And our librarians are incredibly read, and they'll direct students to particular materials that they think are suited for those children. So I've seen them do that again and again, and they buy books with their own money to make sure that their libraries are well stocked with current literature that is suitable for whatever grade they're working with. So I would agree with you guys in terms of I would sustain this book. I think that the topics that are raised in this book, if you're a child that's exploring that book, you have a reason for exploring that book. And there's going to be something in 19 minutes that potentially resonates with you. And it could be the simple notion that the prettiest girl in school and the most popular girl in school may not have everything worked out. So things aren't always as they appear. And that's a very simple topic presented at the beginning of the book. So sustain. Thank you.
Is there anyone online or on the phone still? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I will take a motion for 19 minutes.
I would move that we sustain this and keep it in the libraries.
Motion by Dr. Lund, second by Cynthia. Is there any discussion? Go ahead, Josh.
Are we then not taking any further discussion on whether it stays in all libraries or?
So sustain would be these 4 libraries.
So it's staying in all?
Should remain in its respective libraries.
Yes.
Do you want to comment
Yeah.
on that?
Yep.
That would be the recommendation.
Yep. So if the recommendation is should remain in its respective libraries, then that would apply to what was indicated in the document we received that showed all of the schools. So this one was in Central, Red River, Schrader, and Valley. Go ahead.
I just had a question, because I know at elementary, we sometimes can have notes like my kid cannot check out books by this author or stuff. I would assume middle school, do they have that same sort of thing? Do you know where if there's something that a parent knows this book is in the library, they could put on their kid's account, I don't want them checking this out, so then the librarian wouldn't let them check it out? So then it could be there for the other kid? It was just a question.
Yes, we can work through that. Yep.
Other discussion? Okay. I'll now take a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay? No. Okay. We'll now take a roll call vote.
Lund,
Yes.
Manley is absent. Palmasino,
No.
Shab,
Yes.
Anderson,
No.
Berger,
Yes.
Goffler,
Yes.
and Larson is absent. Flynn,
Yes.
5 yes, 2 no, and 2 absent.
Okay. We'll now move on to Beloved. We'll start with Monty this time.
I found Beloved an incredibly intense book to read. Oh my gosh, and I had to keep Googling, like, what does this mean? What is the symbolism? So to be quite honest, if somebody in 612 checks it out, I want to have a conversation with them. But for me personally, Beloved this might be, it's almost embarrassing to make me think, to say this, but it made me think about what the brutal life of an enslaved woman, and the fact that I had never considered the fact that women that were enslaved perhaps didn't try to have relationships with their children because they were going to be sold. And for me personally, there are so many other things in that book, but I thought if I could teach people empathy and humanity I'm 60 years old, and I just now thought of that because I read a book. And to me, that's what this is all about. So there are some graphic portions in that book that reflect life and tragedy and the horror of living through that. And so lots and lots of things to talk about in that book. I would sustain it.
For me, I think this book could be an example of a text or a read where if you take very specific paragraphs or sentences out that, taken out of context, could not really add to the story, and someone might say, where did that come from, or what is that depicting? And this is probably a process or policy general comment, but I think outside of just sustaining or not books, I think if there's not currently, I wonder if there's some sort of process that our librarians could go to create trigger warnings for some books, because I think that there could be books that on the surface look interesting to someone, or maybe they don't know the whole story, and then they start digging into a book like this where it accounts, child sexual abuse and, other traumatic events that maybe just might trigger someone based on their own experiences. And so, suicide, bullying, things like that, in other texts, I think would be maybe appropriate process that we could consider. But outside of that, I think it was a complicated read in a lot of ways. But I think that, especially for purposes of our discussion, it's important to really have context and a full perspective.
In my opinion, Beloved is educationally suitable as a library resource. This novel speaks openly and honestly about the realities of slavery and more broadly about our nation's history. The reader is forced to confront difficult truths and commit to, or reject, our collective commitment to freedom, liberty, and justice for all. Furthermore, the reader is welcomed into the oral storytelling tradition, which affords an opportunity to explore how stories are handed down and how to think critically about different points of view. Sustain.
Josh?
This one I felt, intense read.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the content for me does not, especially on this one, meet pervasively vulgar, doesn't follow the guidelines. I guess some general comments in, even to the prior one we spoke about, I have a little bit of questions about, how are we selecting books? Why are some books at Red River and not at Central? Why are only 2 middle schools out of all middle schools? Mm-hmm. Why 1 middle school on 1 book? If we're talking about equal opportunity for all, we're not giving it in these cases. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I thought about early on, and this has been a topic that the whole topic has been one that's been on my mind, but another thing I thought about early on was our internet filter, and filtering internet content, and how that plays in. Now it's a completely different medium, right? Obviously there's pictures involved, there can be pictures in books, but there's video, there's so on and so forth. There's plenty of other opportunity for other things there. I question if in some of these cases of these books, content of a similar nature would be filtered via the internet. If you'd be able to get to this content in our school buildings, if students would be able to search it out and get to it. I would venture to say, in not all, but some of the cases for sure, the answer would be no. So that certainly resonates with me. I 100% agree with the the put it on the parents. Parents should be involved. Parents should be able to offer the opportunity for their children to read, be educated by what content they want or not. I think it's well worth mentioning the fact that none of these books are required. They're not what I would consider, I guess, curricular material, right? They're not being taught, required to be read, anything of that nature. The closest to that we come is, I believe, one of the books being available or an optional read in an advanced placement English course, correct? So at Central, right? So again, we're Central versus Red. Yeah, not versus, but one place, not the other. And maybe that AP course is only at Central. I'm not aware of that. So the number of checkouts certainly speaks to me also. Now that we've talked about this, the number of checkouts may go up, like anything. It's interesting to me reading through, and I 100% and agree with and appreciate the committee's work who read these before us and made their recommendations. It's interesting reading through their answers around what content was educational, what content was not. I think that question, whether it's part of the policy, so that is the nature of it. But I think that question is different for everyone. I could answer it completely different than someone else, obviously. And so a lot of cases on some of these books, it was just marked as NA, not applicable. So is the content educational? Can you make anything educational? I don't know. I mean, it's a real question. This book in particular, although I struggled to read this one, I mean, because of the intent, because of the piece of it, I think there is some educational value, and it doesn't meet for me the pervasively vulgar piece. So I would leave it at that.
Bill?
This is a hard one to follow. But I just agreed to leave this book where it is, and I agree that with one of the committee members when they said history is very messy, and it is. And I think especially for the poor living during that time, and I do agree that it was a hard book for me to read, but I think it would be a good book for some kids to read.
Dr. Lund?
I too would sustain this, and I'm going to take Mr. Berger's advice and do my general comments now, and it kind of dovetails with what Josh was talking about. I'm taking off my school board hat and I'm putting on my pediatrician hat, which is now 36 plus years old. I've probably seen over 100,000 kids between birth and 21 years of age, including a lot of teenagers. In the last 6 months, I spent a lot of time with teenagers, and I ask them about reading books and stuff like that. And once they get done laughing and rolling on the floor, we have a further conversation. It's not the books that the parents out in the community should be worried about. It's the electronic media. It's their iPhones. It's their whatevers. I looked it up the other day. 25% of kids under 10 years by 10 years of age have an iPhone. 25%. 75% by age 13. And by age 15, almost every kid has an iPhone. They aren't reading these books. You can tell by the numbers. Very few of them are reading these books. But even my patients who are the most destitute from other countries, they have phones. And this is probably where the problem is. It's not so much this, it's the videos, it's what Josh talked about. And it isn't necessarily in schools, although I too am concerned about what content are they getting in the schools. It's what are they doing all the other times that mom and dad aren't there, or grandpa and grandma. So I think if somebody in the public is concerned about their children and pornography or things like that, they should be spending a lot more time talking about their iPhones, their other electronic media, and less about their reading. So I would sustain this book as well.
Well, being last, I don't have much to add. I just think publicly it'd be good to point out that this book was checked out 5 times, and we have how many students? Over,
74.
well,
High schools,
no,
not high schools.
over
Yeah.
2,000
Yeah.
at the high school, and it's been checked out a whopping 5 times. Keep in mind, Toni Morrison is a Pulitzer Prize, one of the people who gave this recommendation points out, and I mean, I knew this, Nobel Prize, Pulitzer Prize, Presidential Medal of Freedom. Those are committees made up of very distinguished people who make these decisions. So me as a measly school board member here in Grand Forks, I feel like my voice is just one very teeny tiny voice, and I would vote to sustain.
So I'll look for a motion. These ones are currently at Central and Red River. Motion by Dr. Lund to sustain the books recommended by the committee. Second by Monty. Any further discussion? Go ahead.
One thing, too. Keep in mind, Beloved is one of our older ones. And when was that published? I want to just state that for the record. 1987. Don't know how long it's been in the school, but it's been checked out 5 times. I think that's important.
It was a great year. No, I was born. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries.
So, Mr. Anderson, you asked a great question about why are they present in some libraries. They are accessible by students across the district because we have an interlibrary loan system. I can't speak to how we make those determinations, but we do have positions in place that we are going to be able to better collaborate around our resources and make those that we want consistent across the board. That's starting this year, so great question.
All right, we'll start with the bluest eye. Dave, do you want to go first on this one?
Certainly. In my opinion, The Bluest Eye is educationally suitable as a library resource. The novel explores themes of beauty and society's standards thereof, how we perceive ourselves versus how others perceive us, and how violence, specifically sexual violence, perpetuates itself from generation to generation. The author, I think, notably in these discussions, makes the point that parents' refusal to talk openly with their children about puberty, adolescence, and sexual maturity makes these transitions more difficult. Sustain.
I'll go next. For a point of clarification, these are at Central and Red River. I think I would share the same general comments about this book, that it highlights varying perspectives of struggles and oppressive beliefs, thoughts and feelings from someone who's maybe on the receiving end of some oppression, being a minority. So I think it's educational. I think it speaks to experiences that our students may or may not have had in their life, and I would sustain this one.
Another really difficult read, right? Oh, my goodness. And I would sustain it just based on the fact of there's just so much to learn from this. It's not an easy read. It's a tough read. It's about, there's so many issues you can bring up in this book in terms of trauma. And I happened to be reading this at the same time I was reading an educational book about trauma and how it affects your brain and how that can be passed on, DNA and those kinds of things. And I really, for me, I just thought, wow, if I were doing a psychology course or something of that sort, I would definitely pick this book up and do the comparison, right? But yeah, just generational poverty, generational being a black child, and just wanting people to love her and just not having anybody, just how poorly she was treated by everyone that she was surrounded by. There are just so many topics of conversation that a senior, or that kids in high school could get brought into, and led by somebody far better versed than I am in terms of leading those conversations. But I would sustain this book.
Cynthia?
I would vote to sustain this book as well for kind of the same reasons that I said the last time.
Dr. Lund?
I agree, I would sustain this book.
Bill? Josh? Oh, Bill?
Same thing.
Okay.
This one is another hard one for me. And the content, you know, I don't know, maybe it's because I have young children, but I don't know that this to me was educational. I certainly feel that absolutely there's pieces in this that a person may not resonate with, but can learn from, understand. But I don't know that I believe that this one is appropriate to stay.
Okay. I'll call for a motion.
I'll make the motion to sustain The Bluest Eye.
Okay. Is there a second? Second by Monty. We'll take a roll call vote.
Cochler? Yes. Yes. Larson is absent. Lund?
Yes.
Manley is absent. Palmasino?
Yes.
Shab?
Yes.
Anderson?
No.
Berger?
Yes.
Flynn?
Yes.
6 yes, 1 no, 2 absent.
We'll now move on to extremely loud and incredibly close. Bill, do you want to start?
I guess this book I was concerned. All right. This book I was concerned with the detailed sexual acts that were within the book, and I really feel it's for mature readers to and help to really understand the grief that 9/11 caused throughout that. So that's why I just put restricted to high school, and I see it's only in high school, but that's what I put it restricted.
Yeah, there is one copy at Trader.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay, then I would restrict it to high school, but it's never been checked out, but I don't know
Doctor?
how new it is.
Yeah. Dr. Lund?
I would sustain the committee's recommendations.
Cynthia?
Me as well, but I just have to say, I thought this book was incredible. I just never had known of this book or this author. I felt like I really had missed out because I've never read a book on the effects of 9/11 either like this. And it just takes us into that mind of the boy, and he has so many issues that, loss, identity, then just this whole idea of being on what I think is the spectrum of autism. It's just something that I just never had read a book like this. Was it a tough book to read? It is. It's a tough book. It's complex, and no one has checked it out.
Mm-hmm.
They
They probably watched the movie.
Probably watched the movie, right?
Oh, is it a movie?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, so is Beloved.
Yes.
Oh, yes. I don't know if The Bluest, PG-13, many of these. So I would
Okay.
vote to sustain it.
Monty?
Okay, I would vote to sustain, but I did not enjoy this book. Again, I was just like, oh, I would never pick this book to read personally, but bless this little guy. What an experience, right? If you've been to New York and you see the 911 exhibits, right? We all remember where we were when that was announced. So, again, lots of things to talk about. Personally, I did not enjoy this book, but I would sustain it. Yep.
I didn't dislike this book, but I think it hopped around a lot. And the place I was in when I was reading this book, I just wasn't in a place to pay attention to a focused story per se. I think it's interesting that the boy is 9 and having some of these adventures and conversations and things come up. But I did think that is it better suited for an older audience, but it's written by a from the perspective of a younger person. So kind of just those thoughts in my head, and there's a movie about it, I guess. So, Dave.
In my opinion, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close is educationally suitable as a library resource. The novel explores themes of grief, loss, and legacy against the backdrop of a historical event. The author vividly portrays the lived experience of a 9-year-old boy who is somewhere on the autism spectrum, a characterization that could prove useful to those seeking to explain what they go through on a daily basis or those seeking to understand what such a diagnosis may entail. And as an aside, I found the passages about 100 pages in about language and the rules we use, the kind of unwritten rules that we have with each other, just fascinating. I think for students to explore that in their family and friend context is just a conversation all on its own. Sustained.
Josh.
Yeah, my only comment I think on this one would be I don't know that it's age appropriate for middle school, and I think that bodes well to some of the other comments made, that maybe this content, no matter how, we want to put it riveting, heavy, deep content, I don't know that it's age appropriate for middle school, so that was my main concern.
Okay. I'll seek a motion on this book.
I'll make a motion to sustain Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close.
Okay, and again, just as a reminder, it's in Community, Red River, and Schrader.
Plus, there's some additional stuff here.
Plus additional copies in, yeah.
Yeah, we're just clarifying that. So
Yeah.
These, here are the asterisks, if you
Yeah.
want to read those. These all apply to, oh wait, just the 195 additional, so this one.
In GFC, Red River, and Community ELA collections. Okay, Monty seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Okay, we'll now take a roll call vote.
Palmesino? No. Shab?
Yes.
Anderson?
No.
Berger?
Yes.
Gockler? Yes. Larson absent. Lund?
Yes.
Manley absent. Flynn?
Yes.
5 yes, 2 no, 2 absent. And that doesn't count up right. Yes, it does.
Mhm. Yep,
It's
Mary.
late.
Okay, motion carries. Girl to Girl. Monty, do you want to start?
I think I read this one first, and it was the fastest read, right? And the easiest read. And as I read it, I kept thinking about children in middle school who maybe couldn't have a conversation about who they were or who they liked with an adult, or didn't have a trusted adult in their life. I didn't find this book graphic. I didn't find it hard to read at all. I just thought that maybe it would provide some kind of reassurances for kiddos who maybe wanted to just think about liking someone of the same gender. So I would sustain this book.
I agree. I had similar thoughts that it provides a perspective that might be helpful or validating to some of our students.
Just to clarify, this was only at Red River and only one copy, just to clarify, in case anyone heard and checked out twice. In my opinion, Girl to Girl is educationally suitable as a library resource. The author portrays a variety of individuals who belong to the LGBTQIA2 Spirit Plus community, and that representation matters, as youth who are questioning or transitioning may have a difficult time navigating relationships and making sense of their identity. Furthermore, in one chapter, I think it's called TIAD, or Tomorrow is Another Day, pages 109 to 134, the author offers a cautionary tale about the dangers of sharing information online. Sustained.
Josh.
I would simply state I would vote to sustain this one.
Bill?
I would agree.
Dr. Lund?
I would vote to sustain. I find it ironic that we had one copy and it was lost, but now because of this process, we have 8 copies to put back in the library.
Dr. Schaaf.
There we go.
I would vote to sustain it.
Okay, do I have a motion? Okay. Okay, motion by Dr. Lund, second by Monty. Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Last book, Dead Until Dark. Cynthia, would you like to start?
Sure. So, first of all, I never would have read this book. And I've never, I was trying to think if I'd ever read a book on, I get zombies mixed up. Is it vampires, except for Dracula. Then I thought, well, did I read Dracula? It was a long time ago. So that's to say that I pushed through this book, and even though, and it's a series, which I don't have any plans to read further, to be honest, but I thought it's very creative. So for me, it was all about that rather than it was hard for me to focus on the negative side of what the presenter who criticized the book. I can't find my notes on this, so I'm speaking out of memory here. So I would vote to sustain. I'll leave it at that.
Dr. Lund?
I would vote to sustain too. I probably wouldn't read the book either, but I would watch the movie because I like horror shows. So, and then just, you had mentioned about the policy and stuff. I think this policy is going to be reviewed by the Policy Review Committee this year.
Bill? Okay, Josh?
I would say thank you to that. I think that is good to know, that the policy is going to be reviewed. I would, on this one, one copy of Red River, one checkout. Certainly not content I myself would either read or watch, but I would vote sustain this one.
Similar comments about how this was not the shelf I would normally look at. However, in my opinion, Dead Until Dark is educationally suitable as a library resource. The novel illustrates how misunderstandings can develop between groups of people and explores the themes of fear versus trust. The author illustrates that people who celebrate their own differences can more easily celebrate differences in others. I also found just this aside on page 39 about how people on one side of town use this funeral home and people on the other side of town use the other funeral home. No more mention is made of it, but that's a whole case study in and of itself. You can look it up on page 39 before you turn your book back in. Sustain.
I might be an anomaly here, but I actually liked this book. I thought it was like fun and imaginative, and I typically don't like horror, but I kind of like, the sci-fi, fantasy, Walking Dead stuff, whatever. So I thought it was fun. I think digging deeper, how Dave described it, on the surface, it probably doesn't seem educationally valuable, but I think there's some certainly lessons to be learned. So, Monty?
This is not a book I would check out now. This is not, like, I brought this to the house and my family was like, you have, what? Yeah, yep, no. So I kept thinking as I read this book that, kind of to your point, Dr. Lund, about kids on phones, like, okay, maybe this is not my genre, but maybe if a child who didn't read on a regular basis saw this, and maybe if they picked this up. I kept thinking of that. And I kept thinking, this is creative. If you're talking to a group of students about different kinds of books, this is going to appeal to that child. And maybe they would think about doing something creative with their likeness of zombies or whatever this is. Oops, sorry. And so, vampires?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. It's kind of the same thing to me. I'm sorry. People listening at home are going to be like, oh, she's a dork. But anyway, so I would sustain this based on the fact that it's different, and we need to celebrate that. So thank you.
I'll look for a motion.
I'll make a motion to sustain Dead Until Dark.
Okay, motion by Cynthia. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dave. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Before we move on, Maggie, I'm curious if you have read any of these. And this isn't like a quiz homework question, but I'm just curious.
I actually did read, or I picked up 19 minutes in the Schrader Library.
Oh, okay.
I can't say I finished it. I mean, it was like intense, but I didn't think it needed to be like restricted or anything. But
Okay.
I mean, at that age, I'd rather be reading like The Hunger Games or Die Ruby Kid or something. But I don't know.
Something with vampires.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that discussion, and there's a lot of work and time put in, especially for those of you who are more audiobook people. So thank you for your time and commitment to that process, and forward thinking to the policy committee for your work in taking the next steps of going through this process and then reviewing what that process looks like for the future. Now we are on to announcements. Any announcements? School starts this month? Maybe?
August 30th, yes. K through 9.
Awesome.
Dr. Penner, anything about the summit next Tuesday?
Matt is probably wondering if this is the way our usual meetings go, so.
I was just going to say, we need to welcome Matt. Maybe was I late and did I miss this?
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Did they welcome you yet?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yes. Thank you for attending the first official meeting of your tenure. So he was at the finance committee meeting, so I think that's where I got confused. But yes, we're happy to have you. Yeah, so school starts this month. Any board requests for future consideration? Okay. Oh.
Maybe not this first month, but I'll be curious to find out how high dosage tutoring continues since we're moving from Edmentum to this new company and how that affects things. I know it's not the one and the same, but just for that.
Okay. Okay. School board norms, how did we do?
You tell me.
I think we did good. I think this one was a very long meeting, and we've tried to shore a few things up. So moving forward, we'll condense where we need to, and we'll continue to have conversations from our board retreat about how we can revamp some of our meetings. But thank you for the good discussion. And now we are adjourned.